Chapter 4071. Even though she was not far away, Yu could not see her features clearly as she was hidden in the shadows. However, he could still tell from the corner of her snow-white shirt that it was Natalia. Wasn't she in the ward? Yu was so shocked that he stood up from the swing. Natalia seemed to have felt his gaze as well. She avoided his gaze and turned to leave. Natalia! Yu had just called out to her. The figure paused for a moment and immediately ran in another direction. Wait! When Yu saw this, he immediately chased after her. Natalia did not run very fast. After all, Yu was taller than her. In a flash, he was about to catch up with her. However, Natalia changed direction and quickly hid in a corner. Yu chased after her again. When he turned the corner, he raised his head and realized that it was the entrance to the ward building. When he turned the corner, he raised his head and saw Natalia's snow-white figure flickering in and out of view. Wait! Yu did not know why she had run when she had seen him. He also did not know why she had appeared in the back garden. Wasn't she in the ward? Could it be that she had snuck out again? Yu chased after her regardless of the consequences. He followed her figure and turned down many corridors. Finally, he saw her at the entrance of a medicine changing room. That was the end of the corridor. She seemed to be lost. She looked around and did not know where to go. Yu stopped in his tracks and called out softly, "Natalia?" She was obviously frightened. When she turned around and saw that it was him, she did not look too good. Her purple eyes were filled with anger. She was obviously angry. Humph, she snorted. However, this snort was not annoying. It was like the meowing of a kitten. He could not help but feel tender affection for her. Yu guessed that she must have been angry because he had accidentally exposed her whereabouts and had caused her to be captured by Alice. Hence, she couldn't help but feel angry when she saw him. "It's you." Natalia was fluent in Chinese. However, Alice had also mentioned that Natalia had met the child in a welfare home through a good friend when Romanka visited China. Natalia had grown up in China, so she was probably of mixed Eurasian descent. Alice said that Natalia was an abandoned child. No one knew who her mother was or who her father was. She was found at the entrance of the maternity hospital in winter, wrapped in swaddling clothes and curled up in a paper box. When she was found, her face was red from the cold and she was dying. She was so cold that her face was red. If it had happened a little later, he might have been frozen to death. Before Professor Romanka met her, Natalia did not have a name. There were so many children in the welfare home, and they were all referred to by numbers. Natalia was called 9, because she was the 9th child to be found that year. "I'm sorry." Yu apologized sincerely and guiltily. "I really didn't mean to betray you just now." Natalia did not buy it. She pouted and glared at him. She did not want to forgive him. Yu looked a little uneasy. He asked tentatively, "Are you still angry?" Chapter 4072. She didn't seem to like talking. Yu couldn't help but size her up. Alice had said that Natalia had dual identity disorder, but he couldn't see anything wrong with it. "Natalia." He tried to test her again by calling her name softly. Natalia looked up. Her eyelashes fluttered slightly. She tilted her head and finally looked at the boy in front of her seriously. She couldn't help but be captivated by his deep and exquisite eyes. "Your eyes are so beautiful." She narrowed her eyes and smiled. There seemed to be a bright light in her eyes. Was she praising him? Yu smiled back. "Is that so? You really didn't do it on purpose?" Natalia still didn't believe him. Yu immediately said, "Yes, it's true." "Then, do me a favor and I won't be angry anymore." Natalia crossed her arms in front of her chest. She was as proud as a kitten. Yu couldn't help but be curious. "What favor?" Natalia's lips curled into a smile. She suddenly reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. "Come." Natalia held Yu's hand and walked through a corridor. Finally, they stopped in front of a room. She shushed him and carefully pushed the door open. The room looked like an office. Yu followed her in. Natalia walked to the cabinet and pointed at the top. "Up there. Up there. There's a box up there. If you can take the box down, I'll be friends with you." Yu couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Did she have such low standards for making friends? "Okay, I'll take it down for you." The cabinet was very tall. It was almost 2 meters tall. Yu moved a chair over and stood on it. He reached for the box and opened it. Inside was a dazzling array of amber candies. Candies? Yu was a little surprised. He thought that there was some treasure hidden in the box. It turned out that it was just candies. Thank you. Natalia took the candy from him with a satisfied smile in her eyes. She took out a green amber candy from the box. It smelled like green apples and handed it to Yu. Here. Yu took the candy in surprise and asked curiously, why did you leave the candy here? Natalia pouted, a little angry. I didn't hide it. They did. Yes, they don't allow me to eat sweets. Why? Yu could not help but worry. She must be talking about Professor Romanka, right? Looking at the decoration of the office, it was obvious that this was Professor Romanka's office. Why didn't he let you eat candy? I don't know. Natalia was clearly unhappy. She hugged the candy box and sat down on the sofa. Smiling, she opened one of the red candy wrappers and showed it to Yu. My favorite strawberry flavor. Yu hesitated. On one hand, he felt that the child in front of him was as pure as crystal. She was sad because she couldn't eat candy, but she was smiling because of a candy. He couldn't resist such a smile. On the other hand, he couldn't help but worry. He was worried that Professor Romanka didn't allow her to eat sweets. He was worried that Natalia's health wasn't good. Therefore, he went up and took the candy box back. Don't eat it. The smile on Natalia's face froze. Chapter 4073. Natalia was speechless as she stared at him. Her snow-white face instantly flushed red, and her eyes turned cold. Natalia stood up angrily. Her bright eyes were covered with a thin layer of mist. Give me back the candy. However, Yu hugged the box tightly. You can't eat it. Why? Natalia blinked, and her eyelashes were wet with tears. Why did you snatch my candy? If Professor Romanka doesn't allow you to eat it, then you must not eat it. So don't eat it. Yu was being kind. That was because there were indeed some patients who were strict about their intake of sugar when taking medicine. Natalia seemed to have seen through his concerns, but she became even angrier. You're the same as them. She stood up with a pale face and pushed him away angrily. You're the same as them. As she spoke, she bit her lip in sadness and ran away. Yu was about to chase after her, but he got up too quickly and accidentally knocked over the trolley. Yu looked on helplessly at her receding figure and sighed. He turned around and squatted down to pick up the stack of documents that had been knocked over on the floor. When he picked them up, Yu glanced at them and realized that they were Natalia's pathology report. At first, he only glanced at them casually, but his gaze froze. Hallucinogen. This word on the pathology report caught his eye. Yu held the pathology report and glanced at it seriously. Only then did he realize that Professor Romanka did not allow Natalia to eat candy. Hallucinogen was a hallucinogen that had been developed. It was usually used for mental treatment. People who took this drug would hallucinate. If one took this drug, they could not touch sugar because this drug contained a high amount of lactose. If they took in additional sugar, it might cause diabetes. Therefore, Professor Romanka strictly controlled Natalia's sugar intake. Hallucinogen was not a common English word. Most people did not know it at all. But he knew. This was because Gong Fan had been taking this medicine while he was recuperating on Jock Island. If this drug was taken lightly, it would have a certain sleep-inducing effect. However, Yu noticed that the dosage on the pathology report was 5 times more than his. This was already considered high content. If hallucinogen was taken in excess, there was a certain risk of death. Why would Romanka do that? Yu was furious. There you are. Outside the door, Gong Jie heaved a sigh of relief. He pushed the door open and walked in muttering, Didn't you say you were going to wait for me on the swing? When I saw you disappear, I was even prepared to commit suicide to atone for my sins. He sounded so pitiful that it sounded a little exaggerated. But in reality, he really imagined Yin Shishir's dark side. Yu was the apple of her eye. If he dared to lose his biological nephew, he wouldn't be able to make up for it by just cutting his own throat. Yu raised her eyebrows when she saw Gong Jie. Hallucinogen. Alice was a little surprised. What's going on? In the office, Yu spread Natalia's pathology report in front of Alice. Alice picked it up and looked at it. She was stunned. What's going on? Don't you know? Yu was a little surprised. He thought that Alice would definitely know. Chapter 4074. Hallucinogen is a hallucinogen. I'm sure Professor Romanka knows the real use of this drug. Yu paused. The muscles on her face stiffened. Alice held the pathology report and hesitated for a long time. Then she suddenly realized something. Maybe I've guessed why Professor Romanka gave her this drug. Perplexed, the boy sought confirmation from his father. Tell me, what's the reason? This drug is toxic. Although the dosage is not critical, it's still higher than the normal dosage used for pathology. You know that this drug is hallucinogenic. Yes. For general medication, for example, when a patient has bipolar disorder, anxiety, or insomnia, taking this medicine, a small dose can have a certain calming effect. However, according to this dosage, the person taking the drug will have hallucinations. Hallucinations, yes. In other words, you obviously guessed Professor Romanka's intention. Her expression turned cold. Alice nodded and sighed. I'm guessing that Professor Romanka wants to experiment on Natalia. He wants to create hallucinations to awaken, or create Natalia's second personality. By creating hallucinations, he wants Natalia's main personality to believe that she has a twin sister. When the main personality believes in the hallucinations and tampers with her memories, she will naturally split into a second personality. In theory, this is the case, but no one has ever practiced it. Of course, when Professor Romanka wanted to use me to hypnotize Natalia and create a second personality, I didn't agree. It seems that he has resorted to this unorthodox method to achieve his goal. Yu clenched her fists tightly. She must stop taking the drug immediately. I'm guessing that the drug has already stopped. Alice said, this pathology report is from last month. This month, the drug should have stopped. Then she couldn't help but be curious. How did you get this pathology report? Yu pondered for a moment and decided to keep this a secret for now. I got lost in the hospital and accidentally walked into a room. In the room, I saw this pathology report. Of course, he was curious. Natalia had been brought back to the ward by Alice. Why would she appear in the backyard? Although he was curious, since he had promised Natalia to keep this a secret, he naturally had to keep his promise. I see. Alice nodded and said seriously, Professor Romanka is too much. He shouldn't have done this. Natalia is his daughter. Doesn't he think it's cruel? It's too much to use his own daughter for an experiment. Gongjie could not help but chuckle at the boy's concern for Natalia. He could not help reminding him. Natalia isn't Professor Romanka's biological daughter. Not every adoptive father would treat their adopted daughter as their own. Professor Romanka might have adopted Natalia with a purpose in mind. Yu's heart ached. He suddenly raised his head and tugged at Gongjie's sleeve. It seemed like he was negotiating, but his tone was commanding. Uncle, will you adopt Natalia? What? Gongjie was baffled, his face full of question marks. Why should I adopt her? Chapter 4075. But Natalia has already been adopted by Professor Romanka. Gongjie reminded him kindly. Yu did not take it seriously and retorted, this is not adoption, this is abuse. Alice agreed seriously. According to international law, Professor Romanka did not violate any adoption laws. His adoptive relationship with Natalia is legal, and we have no way of interfering. As for your uncle, he can't adopt Natalia directly because she doesn't meet the requirements for adoption. Yu could not help but feel melancholy when he heard this. When Alice saw this, she could not help but be interested. She squatted in front of him and gently tugged at his little hand. Do you like her? Yu immediately blushed. He avoided her gaze awkwardly and snorted. No. Then, why are you so concerned about her? Alice grinned and wanted to get to the bottom of this. Ha. Gongjie rubbed his nephew's head dotingly and said, Are Yu is experiencing his first awakening of love? Has he fallen for a girl? Yu blushed and emphasized, Don't talk nonsense. I just feel that Natalia is very pitiful to be abused like this. He could not help but think of himself. He had been imprisoned in such a world since he was young and had no freedom. But Natalia was different from him. She was a healthy child. It was hard to imagine that she had been abandoned when she was just born. She had survived the harsh winter, and had been forced to be locked up in such a hospital and undergo such experiments. She did not have dual personality disorder, but she had been made to have it. She could have been carefree like other children, going out to play or eating delicious sweets. But she could only be locked up in a cold and miserable ward. Even freedom was what she wished for. Professor Romenka is not fit to be her father. As he said this, Yu looked at Gong Jie with an extremely deep gaze. Gong Jie cleared his throat and said, "Don't tell me, you really want me to adopt her?" Yu continued to glare at him. Gong Jie continued, "I'm not married yet. Girls like men who are caring and responsible." This brat was clearly trying to drag him into the water. Gong Jie still pretended to be dead, raising his head to look into the distance. Yu continued to stare at him. The uncle and nephew faced each other in silence. Yu's gaze was too sharp. Gong Jie could not hold on any longer and surrendered. "I surrender. Please don't glare at me like that. Why don't you let your dear daddy adopt her? That way, you'll have a cute little sister." Yu pursed her lips. "But daddy and mommy have already adopted Lisa." "It's okay. No matter how many Natalias there are, your daddy can afford them all. That's different." Yu crossed her arms and said seriously, "I think you're the most suitable candidate." Gong Jie was silent. This brat was obviously trying to push him into the fire pit, wasn't he? Alice said quietly, "You won't lose anything by adopting her. Anyway, you won't be poor. You might as well agree." Gong Jie's face turned pale. "I don't know how to take care of a child. How do you expect me to take care of her?" When he thought of Natalia's eyes, which were as noble and inviolable as a ragdoll cat, he felt that this little girl was unruly and would not be easy to get along with. Chapter 4076. Alice and Yu both hoped that Gong Jie would adopt Natalia, but Gong Jie was especially stubborn. "Give up. There's no way I'll adopt Natalia." However, half an hour later, Gong Jie sat in front of Professor Romenka with an ashen face and slammed the table. "I want custody of Natalia. Whether you're willing or not, you have to give it up to me." Professor Romenka stared at him in shock. Alice sized up Gong Jie before turning to look at Professor Romenka. Smiling, she said, "Young Master Jie feels that he and this child are fated." After a pause, Alice whispered into his ear, "Professor, you don't know this, but young Master Jie doesn't like women, so he wants to adopt a child. But don't worry, he'll definitely treat Natalia well and treat her like his own." Professor Romenka couldn't bear to part with her. It wasn't because he had deep feelings for Natalia. It was because he didn't want to give up on Natalia. After all, her condition would be helpful to his research. He was naturally unwilling to give up on her just like that. Professor Romenka shook his head, obviously unwilling. However, Gong Jie didn't mind using force since he wouldn't listen to soft tactics. "Don't think that I don't know what research you're using Natalia for." Gong Jie narrowed his eyes and said, "I already have evidence of you abusing the adopted child. If this is brought to the International Court of Justice, all your fame and fortune will be gone." Professor Romenka turned pale with fright. "What do you mean by that? You're using Natalia for your experiments, aren't you?" Gong Jie leaned closer to him and said expressionlessly, "Hallucinogen. Just this pathology report alone is enough to make you suffer." Professor Romenka had initially suspected that Gong Jie was making an empty comment without any evidence. He didn't expect him to have Natalia's pathology report in his hands. Professor Romenka could no longer sit still. Alice shook her head helplessly. Lowering her voice, she said, "Professor Romenka, you know that young Master Jie is from Hurricane Group. You wouldn't want to offend Hurricane Group, right?" Professor Romenka forced a smile, and was silent for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and nodded. "All right. But Natalia's condition is very unstable. If anything happens, send her to my research center immediately." Yu stood to the side. When she heard Professor Romenka's words and saw that there was no trace of reluctance in his eyes, she was even more certain that Natalia was just a sacrifice in Professor Romenka's eyes. An experimental subject. He had no feelings for her at all. He was all the more glad that he had made a wise choice by forcing Gong Jia to adopt Natalia. This man didn't deserve to be Natalia's father. In the ward, Natalia was leaning against the window alone. She looked out of the window in a daze. Her gaze was empty and unfocused. Her chestnut-colored hair fell to the side of her ears. She pouted. She didn't know how long she had been sitting like that until a soft rustling sound came from the door. Puzzled, she looked in the direction of the sound, and saw a small hand sneaking in a candy from the corner of the door. Candy? Natalia's gaze froze. She walked over, squatted down at the door, and picked up the candy. It was her favorite strawberry flavor. Chapter 4077. Just as she finished speaking, another piece of candy rolled in through the crack of the door. When Natalia saw it, she couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. She picked it up again. It was a green apple-flavored candy. Who was it? She couldn't help but wonder who would be so bored as to slip candy through the crack of the door. Who is it? She asked again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Another 3 pieces of candy rolled in. Natalia picked them up and suddenly realized that they were a different flavor from the candy she had hidden earlier. There were purple and pink ones. She had never eaten this kind of candy before. Thus, she curiously peeled it open and realized that this candy was actually soft candy. She put it in her mouth and took a bite. A rich yogurt flavor suddenly overflowed between her lips and teeth. So sweet. It also had a slightly sour taste. However, this sourness didn't affect the texture at all. Instead, it was sour and sweet. It was even more delicious than the candy she had eaten before. She didn't eat candy much. Before she was 6 years old, she didn't even know that candy existed. Later, when she came to Michelle Hospital, a nurse saw that she was cute and secretly gave her a piece of candy. That was the first time she had tasted something so sweet. She liked it very much. This nurse also really loved her. Every time she saw her, she would give her all the candy she had on her. Sometimes it was apple-flavored. Sometimes it was strawberry-flavored. Sometimes it was grape-flavored. However, this nurse only had 2 kinds of candies on her. They were both hard candies. Sometimes it was 1 piece. Sometimes it was several pieces. Later, the nurse gradually became busy. Often, there were many times when she wouldn't see her for a few days. Thus, Natalia would secretly hide these candies in a box. Just like that, from 1 or 2 candies at the beginning, she had stocked up a box full of them. She especially loved candies, but she couldn't bear to eat them. Because at that time, Professor Romanka had started experimenting on her and warned her not to eat sugar. She didn't know what would happen if she ate the candy, so she ate it secretly. Later, Professor Romanka found the candy hidden under her pillow. Following the clues, he found a box full of candy. In a fit of anger, he scolded her harshly and hid the candy in his office. Since then, Natalia was no longer close to Professor Romanka. Natalia didn't like Professor Romanka to begin with. Children are intelligent because they do not understand many things. But often, children like or hate a person. It all depends on whether that person is friendly to the child or not. Although Professor Romanka seemed to love her and was close to her, for some unknown reason, Natalia simply did not like him. If she could choose, she would definitely choose to stay in the orphanage instead of following Professor Romanka. So far, she still called Professor Romanka Professor. In fact, the first reason why Romanka adopted her was because he found her cute. The second reason was that he felt that she had a certain amount of potential. She could split into 2 personalities and would be a good test subject. There were too many factors that could be exploited. Chapter 4078. She had been locked up in the ward for a long time, but she was not willing to be imprisoned like this. After researching for a long time, she finally found a secret door that allowed her to enter and exit the ward freely. Thus, Natalia would often sneak out of prison. She had always wanted to secretly take back the candy box in Professor Romanka's office when he was not paying attention. This was hers, and Professor Romanka had no right to take it away. Actually, she had stopped taking her medicine, so she could eat candy. However, Professor Romanka had forgotten about this, so he did not take it to heart. Natalia was not close to him, so she was not willing to be honest with Professor Romanka about anything. Professor Romanka naturally did not understand why Natalia always escaped from the ward. Delicious. Candy made people happy. There was no doubt about this. Natalia's mood suddenly brightened, as if the sky had cleared after the rain. It tasted really good. However, there seemed to be only one of this flavor of jelly candy. Was there no more? She could not help but feel disappointed. She lay on the ground and looked outside through the crack in the door. She saw a few candies lying alone outside the door, but no one was outside. Who was the person who had given her candies just now? Natalia was curious, so she sneaked to the window. She took out a powerful magnet from her pocket and used it to unlock the window. She flipped out of the window and landed on the ground. When she turned around to look at the door, she was surprised to see that there was a line of candies at the door that stretched all the way to the end of the corridor. She walked over curiously and looked for a while. Then, she squatted down and picked up the candies one by one. She followed the path of the candies and walked to the end of the corridor. However, she found that there were still candies lying quietly on the ground around the corner. Natalia hid in the corner of the wall and looked around. From afar, she could see candies stretching out in a straight line. There was no end in sight. It seemed like a prank, but it did not seem like one. Who was it? Could it be that someone was deliberately playing a trick on her? Natalia frowned. She was a little suspicious, but she still followed the path of the candies and picked them up one by one. When she reached the end of the corridor, Natalia had picked up all the candies. By then, the pockets of her hospital gown were full. She stood up and suddenly saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. She looked and walked closer curiously. Only then did she realize that Yu was standing there quietly with a box of candies in his hands. This box of candies was the one that had been confiscated. He smiled at her and waved at her. "Come here." Natalia walked closer, and Yu handed the box of candies to her. "Here." Seeing him reminded her of the day when he didn't let her eat candy. Natalia was still a little upset. "Why is it you again?" Pausing for a moment, she thought about it and asked suspiciously, "Did you leave all these candies at the door?" "Yes." "Is it good?" Natalia almost nodded her head in disappointment. She held it in and snorted coldly. Her face was full of arrogance, but she was unwilling to talk to him. "Are you still angry?" asked the boy helplessly. Natalia glared at him, clearly regarding him as a bad guy. Chapter 4079. Yu immediately begged for mercy. "I was wrong. I thought you were sick and couldn't eat sweets." Natalia immediately retorted, "I'm not sick. I'm not sick." "Well, now I know that you're not sick. You can eat sweets." Yu clasped his hands together and looked like he was wronged. He blinked at her carefully and said, "Don't be angry, okay?" Perhaps it was his playful gaze that finally dispelled Natalia's anger. She took a deep breath and raised her eyebrows. "Okay," she said, pretending to be generous. "Forget it. You didn't mean it." As she spoke, she stared at the candy box in Yu's hand. She couldn't bring herself to take it, so she hinted at him with her eyes to hand it over. Yu could not help feeling helpless when he saw her staring fixedly at the candy box. Wasn't this girl too gullible? If she was a stranger, wouldn't she be able to get him to leave with a few sweets? Yu deliberately lifted the candy box. Natalia's purple eyes followed the movement of the candy box. Yu could even imagine her saliva flowing out of her mouth. "Do you want some?" he asked. Natalia immediately became alert. She pretended to be calm and tried not to care, but her throat moved. It was obvious that she was craving the candy. "That's my candy." She emphasized this sentence. Yu said seriously, "Although the candy box looks like yours, it's not yours. Also, the candy inside is mine." "You're lying." "I'm not lying. If you don't believe me, you can see for yourself." Yu opened the candy box. Natalia took a look and realized that the candy inside was really not hers. Moreover, these were the soft candies that she had tasted earlier. They tasted better than the ones she had hidden. Natalia's eyes were glued to the candy box. She was craving it. In fact, the so-called candy box was just an ordinary box that could be seen in hospitals. It was a metal box used to store surgical instruments. She secretly took one and used it to hide sweets. She gulped and swallowed her saliva. In fact, she really wanted it, but she pretended to be reserved and just stared at it. Yu Yu was almost amused by her unblinking expression, but he held it in and asked her, "Do you want some?" Natalia nodded, then blushed and quickly shook her head. "I don't want to eat. This candy is my favorite," Yu Yu said as she peeled a piece of candy and popped it into her mouth. Delicious. As he chewed, the aroma of blueberries wafted through the air and into Natalia's nose. She took a sniff, and that fresh and fruity aroma made her saliva even more wantonly. It was like a provocation. Because it was a soft candy, the sound of it being chewed made people salivate. After Yu Yu finished eating, he smacked his lips and licked them. "It smells so good." Natalia felt that she was about to drool when she opened her mouth. She gulped but did not say anything. She just stared at him quietly. When Yu Yu saw this, he laughed in his heart. Hence, he peeled a strawberry-flavored soft candy and walked over to her. He held the soft candy between his fingers and looked at her with a smile. Chapter 4080. Just by looking at it, Natalia could imagine the sweetness of the jelly candy when it was squeezed between her teeth. The sweet juices flowed freely between her lips and teeth. Yu Yu squeezed the soft candy and smiled deeply. "Do you want to eat it?" Natalia did not say anything, but she did not look away either. She just stared at the candy in his hand. Apart from her desire, she did not have the ability to think. However, she did not give in. She still looked proud and aloof. She had no intention of bending over for the soft candy. "You don't want to eat it? What a pity. This candy tastes better than your candy." Natalia thought to herself, "Of course it tastes good. Just the smell of it is enough to make me want to eat it." But she could not give in. Natalia tried her best to retract her gaze, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop staring at him. That candy was simply too tempting. She could not help it. She could not help it, no. She could not give in. She had to be reserved. As she thought about it, she did not move, but she could not look away either. She could only let her saliva run wild. Yu Yu looked at her expression and sighed in his heart. Wasn't this girl a little too cute? She stared at the candy without blinking. She was obviously trying to act nonchalant, but her unblinking gaze betrayed her. He had already seen her swallow a few times, but she was still holding it in. She was saying no, but her body was telling the truth. He could not bear it. Forget it. He would not tease her anymore. Otherwise, he would look very unkind. Hence, he brought the candy to her mouth. "Eat it. I'll feed you. Hurry up and eat it. Otherwise, she would be drooling." Natalia swallowed hard. Just as she was about to open her mouth and suck on the candy, Yu Yu suddenly said, "After eating this candy, we will be friends, okay?" When Natalia heard this, she stopped herself. She shut her mouth and glanced at him in disdain. She finally looked at him, but it was from the corner of her eye. It was obvious that she despised him. Her gaze seemed to say, "Are you trying to bribe me with the candy? Naive." Yu Yu laughed. "Why? Are you not willing to be my friend?" Natalia shook her head. Yu Yu tilted her head and rubbed her chin. "You don't like me?" Natalia's face was still cold. "It seems that one piece of candy is not enough." Yu Yu picked up the candy box again. "If you become my friend, then this box of candy will be yours." Natalia was finally shaken. It wasn't that he wasn't tempted. Looking at the box full of candies, her eyes were filled with yearning. Yu Yu brought the candy to her mouth again. His voice was bewitching as he tried to seduce her. "Be good, eat it." Natalia couldn't take it anymore. She opened her little mouth and carefully bit the candy. The sugar wasn't very big. With this action, her lips touched his fingertips slightly. Yu Yu couldn't help but blush. He felt as if his fingertips had been scorched by her touch. It was burning. Natalia was completely unaware. She sucked on the candy and was finally satisfied. This was the first time she had eaten a soft candy, and it was also the first time she had eaten such a delicious candy. It was so sweet. Chapter 4081. Natalia tasted the sweetness in her mouth and her mood improved. When she looked at Yu Yu again, she finally found him pleasing to the eye. She did not look at him out of the corner of her eye. Instead, she glanced at him. Eventually, her gaze fell on the candy box in Yu Yu's arms. She looked at it again and again. Half testing, half hinting, she asked, Is the purple one blueberry? In other words, she was eagerly waiting for Yu to let her have a taste of the purple candy. Yu could not help but want to laugh. This girl looked cold and aloof, but she was actually a little foodie. In front of the candy, she was not reserved at all. Yu asked tentatively, "Then will you be my friend?" Unless. Natalia's gaze was firmly fixed on the candy box in Yu's arms. "If you give me the whole box of candy, I will be your friend." Yu was a little doubtful that if he gave her the candy box just like that, she would fall out with him. However, Yu still passed the candy box to her. "Here, you can have it." Natalia was so shocked that her eyes widened. She had not expected that Yu would be willing to give her so much candy. Did he not eat it? Or was there poison in the candy? Perhaps it was because the candy was very precious to Natalia. When she saw that Yu had casually given her the candy, she could not help but doubt the authenticity of the situation. Yu saw that she was doubting him and held back his laughter. He pursed his lips and said, "These are all yours. Don't worry, I won't take them back." "You won't go back on your word?" "Yes, of course." Natalia's face finally broke into a bright smile. She narrowed her eyes and smiled at Yu. Then she peeled another candy and popped it into her mouth. In the distance, Alice and Gongjia watched and rubbed their chins. "Are you planning to put Natalia in hurricane?" Gongjia frowned and pondered for a moment. Yu said that she doesn't want Natalia to grow up in hurricane. "Why?" "Because he's worried about you." Alice fell silent. What did he mean by he couldn't be at ease with her around? "Am I a tiger?" "He's afraid that you'll use Natalia as a test subject." Alice fell silent again. "Fine." It seemed like her image as a witch had been deeply ingrained in Yu's heart. "Then where do you plan to settle her?" Gongjia was also considering this problem. He racked his brains and suddenly thought of a good candidate. Ding dong ding dong. In the apartment, on the big bed in the bedroom, Huajin was still deep in sleep. Amidst the constant ringing of the doorbell, he finally woke up. "Ooh." He grumbled in annoyance and lay on the bed reluctantly for a while. The doorbell continued to ring, and it seemed to be ringing more and more frequently. He finally got up from the bed and shuffled to the door in his slippers. He thought that the new assistant had made a mistake about the schedule again. He opened the door and said unhappily, "It's my day off today." The moment he opened the door, Huajin saw the tall figure standing at the door and woke up instantly. The sleepy bug also disappeared without a trace in an instant. Gong. Before he could finish his sentence, he caught a glimpse of Yu standing next to Gongjia and a strange but cute little girl. He couldn't be more awake. "What's going on? Move away." Chapter 4082. Get out of my way. Gongjia pushed him aside and walked into the apartment like the man of the house. "Hey!" Before Huajin could stop him, Gongjia had already walked into the bedroom. Huajin was even more dumbfounded. What was this? Was he trespassing? Yu held Natalia's hand and walked in. She looked around and asked in confusion, "Uncle Huajin, are you still not up?" Huajin rubbed his forehead helplessly and nodded weakly. "It's my day off today, so I'm catching up on sleep." "Catching up on sleep?" "Yeah," Huajin said. "I'm resting for 3 days." "Why? Is there something wrong?" He lowered his head and saw the cute little girl beside Yu looking up at him. He couldn't help but think that this little girl was really beautiful. What was even more surprising was that this girl had purple eyes. He was shocked and squatted down to look at the girl's eyes. Natalia saw that Huajin kept staring at her. At first, she was not used to it and hid behind Yu. She was obviously a little timid. Huajin smiled at her. "It's okay. Uncle isn't a bad person." For some reason, it seemed that Huajin's smile was naturally harmless and harmless. Natalia also realized that this handsome and beautiful man in front of her would definitely not harm her. Hence, she finally gathered her courage and stuck her head out. She blinked her beautiful purple eyes and looked at Huajin curiously. Huajin was a little surprised by her purple eyes. He thought to himself that such a young child wouldn't wear contact lenses. Moreover, her eyes didn't look like they belonged to someone who wore contact lenses. He was a little surprised. He had never seen someone who was born with purple eyes. Hence, he couldn't help but take a few more looks. Maybe she was born with different eyes. Hua Jin could also tell from Natalia's exquisite features that she was of mixed Eurasian descent. It was probably because she was of mixed blood that the color of her pupils was different from that of an ordinary Asian girl. Her name is Natalia. Natalia. What a nice name. Just as he was about to speak, Gong Jie's footsteps came from behind him and stopped beside him. Your house is so small? When Hua Jin heard this, he stood up unhappily and muttered, Don't you know how high the housing prices in the capital are? Such an apartment of more than 100 square meters, located in the downtown business district, was worth tens of millions. This man actually thought that this place was too small? Gong Jie sized him up casually before saying out of the blue, Put on your clothes. This time, Hua Jin was confused. Huh. More than an hour later, when Hua Jin realized that he was already at the sales office of a villa district, he looked at Yu and Natalia, who were sitting on his left, and then looked at Gong Jie, who was looking at the floor plan. The sales representative asked cautiously, May I know if you are paying in full or taking a loan? Gong Jie replied, Full payment. Hua Jin's mouth opened even wider. Huh. Could he do whatever he wanted just because he was rich? Full payment. This villa was worth more than 100 million because it came with its own furnishings. How could he say full payment so casually? Was this guy trying to sell him off? While Hua Jin was still in a daze, when it was time to sign the contract, the sales representative's eyes lit up. Chapter 4083. May I ask whose name is this house under? The Gong Jie turned around and asked Hua Jin, What's your name? Hua Jin, real name. Rong Jin. Write it yourself. Oh, Hua Jin had just picked up the pen and signed his name on the contract under the guidance of the salesperson. He was even more confused now. He took a closer look and realized that he had signed the contract under the ownership of the villa. He was even more confused now. He couldn't understand what was going on. Yu saw Hua Jin's confused face and couldn't bear to see it anymore. Hence, when the Gong Jie went to swipe the card, she said to the confused Hua Jin, Uncle Hua Jin, Natalia is my uncle's adopted daughter. But as you know, his job is a little dangerous and he can't take her with him all the time. After thinking about it, you are the best candidate. Best candidate? Hua Jin looked at Natalia and the corners of his lips twitched. I'm a surrogate adoptive father? Yes. Yu hugged his arm and said coquettishly, Uncle Hua Jin, please take care of my Natalia. Wait. Hua Jin only felt that his mind was in a mess. He waved his hand and took a deep breath. He finally regained some of his composure. He took a deep breath, opened his eyes and forced himself to calm down. You mean this child called Natalia was adopted by Gong Jie, and he didn't have time to take care of her, so he asked me to take care of her? Yu nodded. Yes. Hua Jin frowned and sighed helplessly. I don't have any experience in taking care of children. She's not breastfeeding. She doesn't need you to feed her or coax her. Anyway, just take care of her like you would take care of me. When Hua Jin heard this, his brain still went blank. He still hadn't gotten used to the fact that he was about to step into the ranks of newbie stay-at-home dad. His empty eyes fell on Gong Jie. He swallowed and said tentatively, But I usually have a lot of free time. I have to shoot a movie or something. Gong Jie suddenly fumbled in his arms and asked, How much do you earn in a year? Hua Jin pondered for a moment. This income is not always certain. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. 100 million? I can't get that much. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows. Without saying a word, he took out a stack of checkbooks and wrote something on it with a pen. Hua Jin leaned over to take a look. At that moment, Gong Jie had already signed his name and handed it to him. HSBC. You can withdraw the money directly. Gong Jie handed him a check. It was an empty check. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. Yu explained. You can withdraw as much as you want. Hua Jin swallowed again. This house was registered under his name, and there was even a check like this. I don't deserve this reward. Who said that I don't deserve this reward? Yu glanced at Natalia and said to Hua Jin, As long as you take good care of her, it'll be fine. As for work, as long as you're free, take on a few movies. If you're not free, take care of Natalia first. You don't have to worry about anything else. Uncle will pay the alimony. Wouldn't the alimony be too much? He didn't dare to take it. Chapter 4084. Keep it well. Gong Jie snorted. Hua Jin shivered in fear and put the check in his pocket. After collecting the receipt and contract for the house purchase, Hua Jin got into Gong Jie's car, only to see the latter instructing the chauffeur to drive them toward the furniture mall. Meikai Furniture Mall. Yu brought Natalia to sit in the dessert section. Gong Jie led Hua Jin to the furniture section. Basically, he would pay for the furniture he chose. Hua Jin was speechless. As a celebrity, Hua Jin's income had always been very high. However, it was definitely not so high that he could easily spend 6 or 7 figures just to buy a piece of furniture. A set of kitchen cabinets cost 800,000, a sofa cost 200,000, and a coffee table cost 500,000. When he heard the prices, he was stunned. Wasn't this a little too scary? Originally, he thought that no matter how rich Gong Jie was, he would only be on par with Muyaja. Now, it seemed like that was not the case. Buying a villa was like buying a set of toys. As for the furniture, it was like playing house. It was as if the series of zeros on the price tags were just a series of numbers to him. When night came, the furniture was brought in and the electrical appliances were sent to the new home. Hua Jin stood in front of the villa again. It felt like a lifetime had passed. Just what had happened on this day? He still could not react. It was like a dream. Yu held Natalia's hand and walked into the villa. He announced happily, "Natalia, from now on, this is your new home." Natalia stood at the door in a daze. It took her quite a while to come back to her senses. "Will I be living here from now on?" Natalia's face was a little rosy. She suddenly ran to the sofa and sat down. The sofa was made of American leather and was very comfortable. Sitting on it, she felt like she was being wrapped up. She relaxed her furrowed brows and flashed a smile at Yu. "I like this sofa." Yu walked over and opened his palm. "Let's go. I'll show you your room." Natalia held Yu's hand and walked to her princess room. The entire villa was decorated in American style. The princess room had a romantic atmosphere like a fairy tale. The white wooden four-poster bed, the white bedside, the pink curtains, the light pink theme of the walls, and the beautiful lights. It was a warmth that she had never felt before. "Do you like it?" Natalia pursed her lips and nodded. "Yes, I like it. You'll be staying in this room from now on." "Then, what about you?" "Me? This isn't my home. It's yours." Disappointment flashed across Natalia's eyes. "You don't live here?" Then who's going to live with me?" She suddenly felt uneasy. "Am I going to live alone?" "Of course not." 5 minutes later, Hua Jin squatted in front of Natalia. Yu stood beside her and reminded her softly, "From now on, he's your guardian. You can call him brother." "Wait." Hua Jin interrupted Yu. "How did she call you uncle?" "Daddy." Chapter 4085. Daddy. Hua Jin looked awkwardly at Gong Jie and then at Yu. He complained bitterly. Then wouldn't there be a difference in seniority? When Yu heard this, she felt that it made sense. She pondered for a while, but before she could say anything, Natalia suddenly said, "Then I'll call you Mommy." "Mommy." Hua Jin almost vomited blood. He clutched his chest in disbelief. How did this guy come up with such a nickname? When Yu heard this, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She covered her mouth and laughed out loud. "Ha ha, Mommy." Gong Jie's face was ashen. He should be angry, but he also felt helpless. More than anything, he was questioning Natalia's logic. Hua Jin immediately explained in all seriousness, "You can't call me Mommy. I'm not a woman." Natalia tilted her head, then threw out a sentence that almost made Hua Jin kneel on the ground. "You're not a woman? I thought you and Daddy were a couple." The painful blow was like an avalanche, covering Hua Jin's face. Hua Jin was so angry that his eyes were about to burst. "What? You thought?" This child actually thought that he was a woman. Hua Jin touched his face, feeling wronged. He admitted that he was a little more handsome. But a child shouldn't think that he was a woman, right? What was worse was that Natalia thought that he was a couple with Gong Jie. Hua Jin was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He had the urge to run out of the door. Natalia saw that Hua Jin's face was ashen. She was so scared that she hid behind Yu and muttered softly, "Did I say something wrong?" Yu held back her urge to laugh out loud. She waved her hand and quickly said, "No, no. However, the one standing in front of you is a man, not a woman." Hua Jin muttered unhappily. "The first thing I said when we met was that I was your uncle." "Uncle? Uncle sounds good." Yu snapped her fingers and said to Natalia, "Why don't you call him uncle?" When Hua Jin heard this, he also felt that it was not bad. "And then call me uncle." Gong Jie nodded in agreement. He then said to Natalia, "From now on you will call him Uncle Hua Jin, okay?" When Hua Jin heard this, he felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't because of any other reason, but because he realized that when he spoke to Natalia, Gong Jie was unexpectedly gentle. Her voice was soft and gentle, as if she could drown someone. Luckily, he was facing Natalia. If it had been any other woman, his heart would have stopped beating. Even he couldn't help but feel his heart go numb for a moment when he heard this gentle voice. When Natalia heard this, she nodded. Suddenly, she thought of something and suddenly let go of Yu's arm. She ran to Gong Jie's side and grabbed the corner of his shirt reluctantly. She looked confused and asked, then, "Daddy, where are you going?" Gong Jie furrowed his brows. Even though he had gotten used to having a little girl, who was not related to him by blood, calling him daddy over the past few days, it seemed that he had yet to fully accept the fact that he was a first-time father. After all, he had suddenly changed from a single man to a single daddy. Chapter 4086. However, his feelings for Natalia had improved a lot over the past few days. It was a little strange. Natalia was especially close to him. In order to get close to Natalia, Yu had tricked her with candy and coaxed her nicely. However, when it came to Gong Jie, Natalia liked him so much that she would stick to him whenever he stood there. Yu was also curious as to why Natalia liked Gong Jie so much. He had asked her about it before. The little girl said confidently, "Because daddy is tall and handsome, and he even gives me candy." Yu was not convinced and retorted, "When I grow up, I will definitely be tall and handsome too. Also, I will give you candy too." "But you are not my daddy." Natalia's words made Yu speechless. He pursed his lips and finally had nothing to say. All right. This was the charm of a mature man. "Daddy, don't you live here?" Natalia hugged Gong Jie's thigh, reluctant to part with him. Gong Jie bent down and easily carried her in his arms. He reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. Raising his eyebrows, he asked, "Why? You can't bear for daddy to leave?" Natalia shook her head like a rattledrum. "Don't go. I want to be with daddy." Gong Jie frowned slightly. His lips curled into a helpless smile. "I can stay here with you for a few days. However, daddy has to go out to work after a while. When he is done, daddy will come back. It won't be long." "Really? Gong Jie carried her to Hua Jin's side and coaxed her gently. "In the future, you will be with this uncle, mem? You have to be obedient. It's okay if you don't. Daddy will video call you every day. If this uncle mistreats you, you can complain to daddy and daddy will beat him up." With just a few words, Natalia was so coaxed that she revealed her pearly white teeth. When Hua Jin heard this, he felt that it was unfair. What was this? Why would he mistreat a child for no reason? Moreover, he liked Natalia. Since Gong Jie had entrusted this child to him, he was not happy to see it happen. However, he could only accept it. However, there was one thing that he still had to confirm. "Are you sure that you will compensate me for my absenteeism?" Gong Jie glanced at him. "I'm sure," Yu replied. "Uncle even put his house under your name. This shows his sincerity." Hua Jin calmed himself down. Suddenly, a bad word popped up in his mind. Does this count as being a sugar baby? _B. Alimony property. At that moment, Hua Jin felt like a good wife and mother who took care of the household chores and children. Was it too late for him to back out now? For some reason, a scene appeared in Hua Jin's mind. He was standing in front of the stove with Natalia on his back. He was wearing an apron and a scarf, and he was cooking porridge bitterly. OMG. He did not want to become like this. If this went on, he would definitely become a sallow man. Well, Hua Jin looked at Yu hesitantly. Yu saw through him immediately. Why? Are you going back on your word? Hua Jin replied vaguely. I'm not mentally prepared yet, am I? What mental preparation do you need? Chapter 4087. Gong Jia had been playing with Natalia. When he heard this, he turned around and said coldly, I will hire a nanny, bodyguard, and gardening for you. You just have to play with her and take care of her. Don't let her feel lonely. That's good enough. In other words, these tasks were Hua Jin's job. Accompany her to eat, drink, and play. Hua Jin was a little surprised. He didn't know what kind of special existence this child was for Gong Jia to treat her so seriously. Could it be? Hua Jin looked at Yu meaningfully. When he looked at Natalia, his gaze was unusually gentle. Hua Jin couldn't help but shiver. Could it be? This was Yu's future daughter-in-law? All right. Could it be that his main job was to raise Yu's daughter-in-law? At this thought, Hua Jin couldn't help but want to laugh. He held Yu's little hand and asked curiously, Do you like her? Yu didn't react at first and just nodded. Yes. Of course. He liked Natalia a lot. When Hua Jin heard this, he gave him a meaningful look. Is it that kind of like? When Yu realized what Hua Jin's look meant, he immediately came to his senses and said, It's not that kind of like. Then what kind of like is it? Hua Jin lowered his voice and said, I thought your uncle was raising your future daughter-in-law for you. When he said this, Yu couldn't help but blush even more. That's not it. Don't talk nonsense, okay? After a pause, Yu explained, It's probably the kind of like you have for a younger sister. Liar. When I saw you looking at Yueyao, that wasn't the way you looked at her. Although he doted on her a little, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at Natalia was definitely not just limited to sibling love. However, Hua Jin was just teasing him. How old was Yu? How could such a young child understand the love and affection of the adult world? It was probably because he liked her, so he wanted to treat her well purely because he liked her. Hua Jin deliberately teased him. Don't worry, I'll definitely help you raise your wife well. Bah. Yu started to threaten him. If you continue to spout nonsense, I'll get uncle to cripple you. Don't. Hua Jin clasped his hands together and begged for mercy. I was wrong, I know I was wrong. Hey, don't tell on me. Yu pulled Hua Jin to the side and whispered. Actually, my feelings for Natalia are pure. When I look at her, I feel like I'm looking at myself. Why? Because, Yu said in a low voice, actually before this, she was adopted by a professor who specialized in the field of psychology and psychology. She was an orphan, but after the adoption, the professor used her as a test subject. Test subject? Hua Jin's expression turned solemn the moment he heard this term. It was inhumane. His mind immediately thought of examples such as human experiments and so on. How could it be so overboard? She was actually a normal child, but the professor wanted to study multiple personality disorder, so he cultivated a second personality in her. Hua Jin was smart and quickly understood what Yu meant by cultivating a second personality. Chapter 4088. Yu's expression was solemn. To be precise, it's not a preparation. It's already created. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. Is it possible to create such a personality? He had always thought that dual personality was either influenced by the environment or born with it. He had never heard that it could be cultivated by humans. How could someone use such a young child to do such a messy experiment? In the past, he admired scientists because they had contributed a lot to mankind. But now, Hua Jin felt a chill run down his spine when he heard about it. It was too terrifying. Dual personality is an extremely painful thing. How could he do that? It's probably because the adopted child has no blood relatives. So he doesn't know how to cherish her and is not fit to be Natalia's father. So, Hua Jin looked at Gong Jia and suddenly changed his view of Gong Jia. He got Natalia's custody? Yes. Uncle has already gotten Natalia's custody. But you know that with his work, Natalia can't be by his side all the time. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous. So when necessary, he needs someone to take care of her. You're a good candidate. Why? Hua Jin pointed at himself, and was a little surprised. Why me? I'm also very busy with work. Because Uncle Huajin is very gentle. Yu smiled. You're so gentle to me. You'll be gentle to Natalia too. I believe you'll be good to Natalia. Huajin couldn't help but feel warm inside when he heard that. He didn't expect Yu to have such an image of him. Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Yu raised her hand and stuck out her little finger. Okay, that's a promise. Okay. Huajin walked in front of Natalia and squatted down so that he was at eye level with her. Natalia, can you call me Daddy in the future? Daddy. Natalia blinked her beautiful eyes. She looked at him, and then at Gongjia. Her long eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings. Huajin's heart melted just looking at her. He couldn't help but think that it would be great if this little girl in front of him was really his biological daughter. But then again, if it was his daughter who looked like him, she would definitely be very beautiful. Daddy. Yes. Huajin squeezed her little hand. Don't call me uncle. How about calling me Daddy? Natalia laughed. I have 2 dads. When Huajin heard this, he was also stunned. How could he have forgotten that Natalia already had Gongjia as her daddy? Can I call you Mommy? Natalia said out of the blue. Huajin was instantly stunned. He asked hesitantly, why? Because. Natalia's next sentence left Huajin at a loss as to whether he should laugh or cry. Because, you're prettier than a flower. Also, you don't look like a man. Ha ha ha. When Yu heard this, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Chapter 4089. Huajin's face darkened completely. His fans acknowledged that he was prettier than flowers, so they gave him the nickname, Hua Hua, which meant that he was prettier than flowers. But, what did they mean by he didn't look like a man? Even a child was bullying him. Stop laughing. Huajin shouted angrily. Seeing that Yu was still laughing, he pushed his head lightly and said, I'm talking to you, don't laugh. I have to explain it properly so that you won't develop a gender identity disorder at such a young age. When Yu heard this, he stopped laughing and started to criticize Huajin seriously. Uncle Huajin, I feel that you were born with a gender identity disorder, so you can't blame her for this. You see, at least she knows that Uncle and I are men, but she mistook us for men. You really can't blame anyone else for this. When Huajin heard this, he raised both hands in surrender. He had already experienced Yu's sharp tongue. However, he still had to explain the matter seriously. Huajin turned around and said to Natalia seriously, I'm a man, not a woman. You can call me Daddy, Uncle, or Brother, but you can't call me Mommy, Auntie, or Sister. Do you understand? Looks like a man who has been hurt before, Yu added. Indeed, like Auntie, Sister, and the like. When Huajin wasn't famous yet, he would often hear these strange nicknames when he walked on the streets. Even when he became famous, he was still troubled by this. Many anti-fans and straight guys were jealous of him. He was obviously a man, but he looked like a woman. The anti-fans said that there were 2 female leads in his movies. Besides the real female lead, there was another female lead, which was the character that Huajin was playing. When Huajin first saw these comments, he was furious. He didn't understand where so many anti-fans came from, and he didn't know how many ghostwriters were involved. But later on, he gradually became numb to it. Later on, he seemed to have trained himself to be like an iron wall, and his heart wasn't as fragile as before. However, Huajin shook Yu. You can't say that I'm like a woman. Otherwise, I will definitely be very sad. Very sad. Very sad. Yu was shaken until he was dizzy. He immediately hugged Huajin's shoulders and said softly, Okay, I know. I know. I won't joke with you anymore. Don't shake me anymore. Otherwise, I'll be broken. Gongjia saw his nephew being shaken by Huajin like a puppet, but he turned a blind eye to it. Instead, he pulled Natalia in front of him and said gently, Daddy has work to do. You should follow this uncle and be good, okay? If he bullies you or mistreats you, tell Daddy. In the past few days, Gongjia and Natalia's relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. In fact, Gongjia hadn't wanted to adopt Natalia at all. To him, having another child was nothing more than having another burden. Moreover, she wasn't his biological child. He already had Yueyao, this little princess. Hence, no matter how beautiful and cute Natalia was, he was indifferent. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jie finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. Chapter 4090. He already had Yueyao, his little princess. Therefore, no matter how pretty and cute Natalia was, he would not be moved. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jie finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. To everyone's surprise, Natalia was especially close to the man the moment she saw him. Firstly, it was because Gong Jie was tall and handsome. Secondly, the man inexplicably gave her a warm sense of security and belonging. For an orphan like Natalia, what she lacked the most was a sense of security and belonging. This was because she did not have the concept of home since she was young. Moreover, from the orphanage to the Michelle Hospital, Natalia had never felt a sense of belonging. She did not know what a home was, but Gong Jie gave her this kind of warmth. She wanted to rely on this man. At that time, Yu and Alice were also there. When they saw Natalia taking the initiative to throw herself into Gong Jie's arms, they were extremely surprised. They had never thought that Natalia would be so close to anyone. Gong Jie was also very surprised. He had only seen Natalia once. Moreover, at that time in the office, Natalia's attention was all on Yu. Obviously, she did not notice him. To be precise, this was probably the first time they had met. He was also very surprised that Natalia, who was as cold as a cat in front of Yu, would take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Could it be that this was predestined fate? However, Natalia's throwing herself into his arms did not make him feel repulsed at all. In fact, he enjoyed this kind of closeness. Gong Jie liked girls very much. He did not even think about getting married. However, he had thought about what his future daughter would look like. If she looked like him, then she would definitely look like Yin Shishir. She would have a pair of beautiful and charming peach blossom eyes. Her pupils were sparkling, as if there was a vast galaxy hidden in them. She would have a small but perky nose, and pink lips that were like cherry blossoms. Her skin was white and clean, without a trace of impurities. Everything was as beautiful as a crystal. He had never imagined what his future other half would be like, but he had already thought of what his daughter would look like. She must be as beautiful as Yueyao. However, he did not expect that he would adopt a daughter like Natalia. When she returned to the country, Natalia was afraid of strangers, but she was not afraid of him. She wasn't close to Yu or Alice, but she liked to cling to him. Especially at night, Natalia liked to hug him to sleep. At first, Gong Jie didn't know what to do. He didn't know why, but at first, he felt that it was a little awkward for such a small girl to sleep so close to him. However, one day was fine, 2 days passed, and on the third day he seemed to have gotten used to the identity of father. What was there to be awkward about? Natalia was his daughter. Even though they were not related by blood, they still treated each other as their own. In fact, for Gong Jie, a sense of belonging and security was an extremely luxurious feeling. Even though he was born into a big family like the Gong family, it did not give him much sense of security. He had received military education from his father since he was young, and what was instilled in him was a cold concept. The warmth of a family was still in the memories of his mother and sister. Chapter 4091. This was also the reason why he was so reliant on Yin Shishir. No one could replace the warmth that Yin Shishir gave him. For some reason, Natalia felt close to him. In the beginning, she thought that such a man with such dazzling looks, handsome, tall, and strong arms would be able to carry her in his arms. Later, the usually cold Gong Jie showed her a rare smile. Natalia was so disappointed that she was mesmerized by this smile. He was too handsome. She fantasized about how good it would be if this man was her father, her family. However, her dream came true. Alice told her that the man in front of her was her daddy and her future family. Natalia liked him more and more. Most likely, the two of them were destined to have such a bond in their fates. Even Huajin was surprised that Gong Jie would be so patient with a child. When Natalia heard that Gong Jie was going to leave, she immediately felt reluctant. Frowning, she hugged his arm and said softly, "Don't go." Gong Jie could not help but be moved by her words. It was as if there were roots under his feet, trapping him. He really couldn't bear to leave. The girl in his arms was like cotton candy. Such a pitiful expression, grievance, and longing melted his heart. He actually had an inexplicable feeling for this child. Could this be the legendary fatherly love? Gong Jie had always thought that he was the kind of man who was born with a lack of fatherly feelings. For a man like him, it was hard to imagine what kind of husband and father he would be if he started a family in the future. He didn't expect. He actually had self-awareness as a father. Hua Jin also said, "Why don't you stay for a few days and keep her company? I'm not close to her. If you leave, I'll really be at my wit's end." Yu also said, "Uncle, why don't you stay for a few more days? There's no hurry to deal with hurricane." Gong Jie also nodded and agreed. "All right." He squeezed Natalia's soft hand and comforted her. "Then, Daddy will stay for a few days, okay?" Natalia's smile widened. "Okay." On the first day that Gong Jie stayed, Hua Jin realized a problem. It was true that he was rich. Sure, he could do whatever he wanted. Originally, he thought that even if the villa had been renovated and the furniture and appliances had been moved in, there would be no special smell after special treatment. However, it did not mean that there was no smell at all. Even though it had been ventilated for an entire afternoon, there was still a slight smell of paint. At night, although there was no obvious smell, Hua Jin still advocated not to move in for the time being. However, Gong Jie refused to comply. He complained that Hua Jin's place was as big as a fish tank. How could anyone live there? It was too cramped. Hua Jin was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Fish tank? It was a house of more than 100 square meters. How could it be a fish tank? It was too hurtful. As for Gong Jie, he immediately called the housekeeper and the cleaner. In a short while, the last bit of smell in the house dissipated. Yu also said that no matter how ventilated a new house was, if no one lived there, it would not have the smell of home. Chapter 4092. Hence, Hua Jin had no choice but to call for a moving company. Within a few hours, all the belongings in the apartment had been moved into the villa. That night, they moved into the villa. Hua Jin felt like he was in a dream. No one would have thought that he would move into the villa that he bought on the same day. This was too fast. Too fast. Too fast. At night, the salesperson came to prepare the final procedures for the handover of the villa. She had wanted to see if the owner of the villa had noticed any problems with the quality. In the end, she realized that the owner had already moved in. Was this a hotel? Did he move in with his luggage? The salesperson was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still shocked. She had never seen such a generous buyer. Although there were many rich big bosses in Beijing, no matter how generous they were, buying a house would require a few days of planning. It was not a one-time deal. In the end, this customer was good. A few 100 million yuan was easily spent. The house was handed over before noon, and when she came to take a look at it at night, the furniture and appliances were all ready. Did he have to be so scary? Moreover, the owner was so young and so handsome. Hence, the salesperson tried to find out from Yu who Gong Jie was to him. In the end, Yu said casually, "Gong Jie is my uncle. Auntie, he already has a girlfriend." Just as she was wondering who this handsome and rich man's girlfriend was, she watched as Hua Jin walked out in a bathrobe. She was even more dumbfounded. Originally, when she was at the sales office, she was a little curious. She had suspected the identity of Gong Jie and Hua Jin. Because Gong Jie had bought the house with his credit card, the house was registered under Hua Jin's name. She knew who Hua Jin was. He was a big celebrity. Many big celebrities came here to buy houses. It was not the first time she had seen a big celebrity buying a house. There were even many big bosses who bought villas for their mistresses. It wasn't like there weren't any. However, the relationship between this Gong Jie and Hua Jin made her a little confused. In the end, as soon as she entered, she saw Hua Jin in a bathrobe for a moment. He could not help but let his imagination run wild. Could it be that between the two of them? Was it that kind of relationship? This man's partner was Hua Jin, who was rumored to be gay. Could it be that they were also kept as mistresses? The salesperson felt that he was in a bad mood. Why were all handsome men in pairs? Finally, after completing the procedures to hand over the room, the salesperson left with a gloomy face, clutching his heart. Gong Jie walked over with Natalia in his arms. Seeing Hua Jin in a bathrobe, he cleared his throat and said sternly, "Please don't show your chest in front of Natalia." Hua Jin was dumbstruck. He reacted and immediately retorted, "What do you mean by exposing my breasts? I'm well covered. Your chest is exposed." Gong Jia looked righteous. Unsightly. Hua Jin was speechless. He was so angry that he gritted his teeth, but he told himself not to stoop to the level of such people. Hence, he went back to his room with an ashen face. It was not until he changed into his pajamas that Gong Jia looked better. Yu covered her mouth and snickered at the side. Hua Jin felt very aggrieved. Did he lose his basic personal freedom just to take care of a child for him? Chapter 4093. Yu looked at Hua Jin and then at Gong Jia and muttered to herself, "What a pair of clowns." Especially when she saw Hua Jin's steely expression. Yu's heart ached for him for a few seconds. At night, Natalia was still pestering Gong Jia to sleep with her. Initially, Gong Jia wanted Hua Jin to coax Natalia to sleep. However, Natalia was a little picky about the bed and the person. She only recognized Gong Jia and not Hua Jin. Hua Jin had no choice but to find Gong Jia's room awkwardly. He braced himself and knocked on the door. Gong Jia happened to be awake. When he opened the door and saw him, he was a little surprised. "What's wrong?" "Natalia misses you." Hua Jin sighed and said helplessly, "This child doesn't really recognize me. She only recognizes you. Moreover, without you, she can't sleep peacefully." Gong Jia was stunned for a long time. He said helplessly, "If you can't handle her, what will happen to you and her after I leave?" "I'll have to take one step at a time. There's nothing I can do." Gong Jia couldn't help but laugh. He walked to Hua Jin's room. The wall lamp was on. When Natalia heard Gong Jia's footsteps, she immediately sat up on the bed. When she saw him, she smiled. "Daddy." She opened her arms to Gong Jia. Gong Jia walked slowly to the bedside and sat down on his side. However, he didn't respond to her hug immediately. Natalia was very surprised. She tilted her head and looked at him in confusion. She didn't understand why he didn't respond. Gong Jia asked in a low voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" This was the first time Natalia saw Gong Jia so serious. For a moment, she felt inexplicably guilty. Actually, she did sleep well. However, the bed was too unfamiliar. Moreover, she was not used to Hua Jin. After all, it was the first time they met. She tossed and turned on the bed, unable to fall asleep. Natalia stammered, I can't sleep." "Recognizable bed?" "Yes." Natalia nodded fervently. "I really tried to sleep, but the bed was too soft. I couldn't fall asleep." The mattress under her was the best zero-pressure mattress on the market bought by the Gong Jia. It was not soft, but at least it was more comfortable than the hard iron beds in the hospital. Natalia had been sleeping on a metal bed all this time, so she couldn't get used to the soft and comfortable mattress all of a sudden. "Close your eyes and don't let your imagination run wild. You'll fall asleep soon, okay?" Gong Jia comforted her gently. Nibbling on her lower lip, Natalia nodded with a frown on her face. However, when she lay down and her brother was about to tuck her in, he suddenly heard a choked sob coming from the woman. He was shocked and immediately leaned over. The sobbing sound became clearer. Hua Jin heard it too and reminded him softly, "Is she crying?" Gong Jia frowned. This girl couldn't be that weak, right? Hua Jin frowned and said with a headache, "It's her first time in such a foreign country. Maybe she hasn't gotten over the jet lag yet. Moreover, she's in a foreign bed with a foreign person. She'll naturally feel unfamiliar and scared. Why don't you keep her company tonight? I'll sleep in your room." With that, Hua Jin tried to find an excuse to escape. Gong Jia shouted in a low voice, "You're not allowed to leave." Hua Jin's footsteps were forcefully stopped. Chapter 4094. Hua Jin stopped in his tracks. "Sit over here." Gong Jia ordered again. Hua Jin had no choice but to move back to the bed stiffly like a robot. "Lie down." Hua Jin lay down with a straight back. "Hug her." Just as Hua Jin was about to retort, he vaguely felt a sharp gaze sweeping over him in the dim light. Frightened, he immediately opened his arms and pulled Natalia into his embrace. A certain great demon king was finally satisfied. He whispered into Natalia's ear, Daddy will sing for you, okay? Eh. Natalia smiled in surprise. Okay. When Huajin heard that Gong Jie wanted to sing, he was shocked. Oh my god. If Gong Jie wanted to sing, wouldn't that be wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves? He vaguely remembered that Yu didn't seem to have any talent in singing. If that was the case, Gong Jie's uncle probably didn't have good musical genes either. Just as he was making wild guesses, Gong Jie opened his thin lips slightly and sang in a deep magnetic voice. Outside the window, the raindrops, dong dong ding ding, falling into my heart, freezing into ice, memories of the past, 2 people in a room, roses and champagne. When you leave, I can only embrace the cold air. When Gong Jie's deep voice came out of his thin lips, Huajin was stunned when he heard it. Perhaps he didn't have high expectations for Gong Jie. He had always thought that Gong Jie would be tone-deaf like Yu. However, he had forgotten that Yu's tone deafness must have been inherited from Muyaja. He recalled that Gong Jie's mother was Mu Qingqing. Mu Qingqing's voice had once shocked the entire capital. With such a singing mother, Yun Shishir's singing was also very good. And how could Gong Jie's voice be bad? Good, his voice was even louder than Gu Xing's. In the world of singers, Gu Xing's voice was the only one that the general public recognized. His singing was soulful, magnetic, and had a penetrating power. This penetrating power did not refer to his voice, but it had a power that could penetrate one's heart. It's easy to infect everyone. To be fair, Gu Xing's singing skills were definitely not the best. However, his voice was the most contagious of all. Gong Jie was better than him. So much so that Huajin even had the urge to cry when he heard this song. Memories of you. Too many to count softly. Softly lonely sings to me I'll never forget. Evidence of your presence. How else am I going to prove it? Waiting for the dawn together. Even if I lose you, I'm gonna love you too. Even if the whole world is dying, I gave myself an ending. Gong Jie rarely sang. He did not like to listen to music and rarely sang. In the past, when Yun Shishir pestered him to sing, he was too shy to say it. However, when it came to Natalia, he was able to throw away all his burdens naturally. After singing 2 songs, Gong Jie heard Huajin's steady breathing and knew that he had fallen asleep. Natalia's eyelids gradually became heavy, and she was about to fall asleep. Just as he stood up and was about to leave, a soft little hand grabbed onto him. Gong Jie turned around and saw Natalia holding his hand. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "Don't go." Her soft voice carried a hint of reluctance. "Stay with me. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep. Okay?" Chapter 4095. He sat down and caressed her forehead gently. "Good girl. You should sleep now. I want you to keep me company." Natalia's coquettish tone was irresistible to him. Feeling helpless, he lay down next to her and adjusted the quilt for her. Then he gently rubbed the tip of his nose against her forehead. "Sleep. Good night." Natalia's lips curled into a smile. Her eyelids gradually closed, and she soon fell asleep. Before nightfall, Yu was sent back to the Mu family. When he told Yun Shishir that Gong Jie had adopted a daughter, Yun Shishir was so shocked that her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. How was that possible? Her brother was known for being a cold-hearted person. How could he adopt a daughter out of kindness? She couldn't wait to meet the girl who made her brother break his rules. She wanted to see what kind of girl she was. Yu had the keys to the villa. There were a total of 3 keys. 1 for Huajin, 1 for Gong Jie, and 1 for him. However, the next day, when Yun Shishir opened the door of the villa and appeared at the bedroom door with Yu, she saw the 3 of them hugging each other as they slept. She didn't feel good at all. When Yu saw his mother standing rooted to the ground in a daze, he too poked his head in curiously. However, when he saw Gong Jie hugging Natalia while the latter hugged Huajin to sleep, he was so shocked that he sucked in a breath of cold air. Ahem. Yu cleared his throat solemnly. Gong Jie was a light sleeper. When he heard the commotion, he opened his eyes abruptly and looked in the direction of the sound. He saw Yun Shishir and Yu standing at the door. He was slightly shocked and immediately sat up on the bed. He ran his fingers through his messy hair and followed Yun Shishir's gaze to the side. Huajin. Oh, he remembered now. Last night, the 3 of them seemed to have slept together. However, wasn't it normal for men to sleep together? Why was his sister looking at him with such a meaningful gaze? Gong Jie's lips twitched. Could she have misunderstood something? However, Yin Shirshir didn't say it out loud. If she didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't even have a chance to explain himself. If he tried to force an explanation, it would only make things worse. It would only make things worse. However, the way she looked at him seemed to be saying, I know you don't have to explain. Gong Jie felt even more frustrated. He stretched out his long leg and immediately kicked Hua Jin awake. Hua Jin also woke up at once. He sat up abruptly. When he saw Yin Shirshir, he thought that he was dreaming. He giggled a few times. When he turned his head, he saw that Gong Jie was also there. He immediately couldn't wake up anymore. Why was he sleeping in this room? Hua Jin thought about it carefully and finally remembered. He remembered. Yesterday, Gong Jie had sung for Natalia. In the end, he had fallen asleep while listening. It had been a very peaceful night. He didn't have any dreams. He didn't know what happened after that. Looking at the situation, could it be that Gong Jie had also stayed in this room last night? That must be it. Natalia must have been reluctant to let him go and pestered him to stay. When he saw the strange look in Yin Shirshir's eyes, Hua Jin's eyelids twitched even more violently. He had also been reduced to the same awkward situation as Gong Jie. He also felt that Yin Shirshir had obviously misunderstood something. However, since she didn't say it out loud, he couldn't explain it either. What should he do? He couldn't let her misunderstand. Chapter 4096. Why are you sleeping here? Hua Jin paused and suddenly slapped his head. He immediately pretended to be calm and said, I remember now. Yesterday, Natalia couldn't sleep and wanted to pester you. You sang for her, and then I fell asleep while listening. But why are you sleeping here too? Didn't you ask me to develop a relationship with Natalia? Gong Jie knew very well that Hua Jin was deliberately saying this to explain to Yin Shirshir, so that she wouldn't let her imagination run wild. Thus he played along and said, She didn't want me to leave, so I lay down. I was sleepy too, so I didn't think too much about it. Why, do you mind? I don't mind. No wonder you slept so tightly the whole night. Hua Jin quickly said, But what was the name of the song you sang yesterday? It was so good. I'll download it and listen to it. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie asked in a low voice, Did I sing? Yin Shirshir's attention was immediately diverted. Xiao Jie, did you sing? Her astonished look surprised Hua Jin even more. From what you're saying, he never sang before. Yin Shirshir nodded. Xiao Jie doesn't like to listen to music, so he doesn't like to sing either. But I think his singing should be very good. Gong Jie's face turned green from embarrassment. No way. How can that be? I just think it's very good. Hua Jin said to Yin Shirshir. When I heard him sing yesterday, it was really amazing. But I've never heard that song before. Is it an old song? Gong Jie ignored him. This song was actually composed by him when he was bored. Because he didn't like to sing, but that day, when he was sitting by the beach, a melody suddenly appeared in his mind for some reason. The lyrics were also born naturally along with the melody. There was no one around, so he sang it himself. As he sang it, he remembered it deeply. To be more precise, the melody and lyrics were all randomly hummed by him. When Hua Jin heard this song, he was a little surprised at first. She was surprised by his charming voice and even more surprised that he had never heard such a beautiful song before. Logically speaking, with such a high standard of arrangement, it should be an instant hit. Why had he never heard of it before? Hua Jin didn't know that the Gong Jie was humming to himself. If he knew, he would be shocked. Natalia was woken up by the voices of a few people. Coincidentally, she had slept enough. She opened her eyes and blinked. Gong Jie realized that she was awake and gently pinched her cheek. You're awake. Like a kitten, Natalia snuggled into his arms and hugged his waist. Daddy. Gong Jie, too, reached out to hug her and gently caressed her silky hair. Such an intimate snuggle made you feel very uncomfortable. Why was she so clingy to Gong Jie, but not willing to play with him? He didn't know what this uncle of his was capable of. Could it be that he had secretly fed Natalia some kind of bewitching potion? Gong Jie suddenly realized that Yu was staring at him with an inexplicable hatred. When Hua Jin saw this, He couldn't help but want to laugh. This uncle and niece pair was really too cute. This was the first time he had seen Yu jealous. Chapter 4097. Yin Shirshir noticed it too and held back her laughter. She had never seen Yu get jealous before, so she found it very novel. It wasn't that Yu had never been jealous before, but it was only towards her. Other than her, she had never seen Yu get jealous of anyone. Yin Shirshir also looked at Natalia seriously. No matter who it was, they would still be deeply attracted by her mesmerizing purple eyes at first glance. She was very surprised. In this world, people with a pair of purple pupils were extremely rare. There were many people who were born with different eyes, but pure purple eyes were extremely rare. She remembered that in the era of black and white photos, there was a European and American actress called Elizabeth Taylor, who had a pair of purple eyes. That pair of eyes could be said to be a rare treasure of that era. However, there was still controversy about her purple eyes. Some people said that her eyes weren't pure purple, but that it was just an illusion under the refraction of light. But now, the beauty had passed away, and the photos that remained were all black and white. There was no way to verify it at all. However, the eyes of the girl in front of him were truly purple. She was too beautiful. Yin Shirshir couldn't help but sigh inwardly. No wonder he was her son. His taste was extraordinary. Aside from her purple eyes, this girl's facial features were very delicate and cute. Yin Shirshir picked up Yu and said comfortingly, "Let's wait outside, okay? Natalia wants to change her clothes." "Okay." Yu nodded like a gentleman. Yin Shirshir had just carried Yu out when Gong Jie stood up and said to Huajin, "Help her change. I'll wait outside." With that, Gong Jie ignored Huajin's pleading gaze and left the room. Huajin and Natalia stared at each other in bewilderment. This time, they had packed a lot of Natalia's clothes. Many of them were new clothes that Gong Jie had bought for her. Natalia could not help feeling disappointed as she watched her man leave. Huajin saw this and gently patted her head. He smiled and said, "I'll help you put on your clothes, okay?" "No." Natalia pouted. "I can wear it myself." "You can wear it yourself?" "Okay." With that, Natalia walked to the wardrobe and picked up a dress. She seemed to like dresses. However, it was normal for girls to like dresses. Huajin sat quietly at the side, but he intentionally looked away. Although Natalia was still a young girl who had yet to develop, he still wanted to avoid her. From the corner of his eye, he saw her unbuttoning her nightgown. Relieved to see that she was dressed properly, he stood up and said, "I'll wait for you outside." Natalia was a little surprised and nodded blankly. Although she was young, she understood the difference between men and women. Although she was still young, Huajin respected her as a woman. This gentlemanly attitude warmed Natalia's heart. In fact, she had long understood the difference between men and women. She also knew that there were some things that she should avoid. However, in the hospital, Professor Romanka didn't seem to mind at all. This made her feel disgusted. However, seeing how Huajin adhered to his principles, Natalia felt warm in her heart. Chapter 4098. Her impression of him had also improved. When Huajin walked out of the room, Gong Jie had just finished changing his clothes. When he saw him walk out, he looked displeased. "Aren't you going to help her change her clothes?" Huajin frowned and seemed to be in a difficult position. She's a girl. Although she's still young, it's better to teach her that there's a difference between men and women from a young age. It's not appropriate for a man like me to do that, right? When Gong Jie heard this, he immediately realized this problem and looked at Huajin in a new light. "I didn't expect you to be so principled." Huajin snorted. "Of course. Do you think that everyone is as stupid as you?" When Gong Jie heard this, his expression changed. "What did you say?" "No. Nothing." He quickly turned his head and mumbled softly, obviously terrified. Yin Shirshir, who was trying to hold back her laughter, suddenly said, "Does she know how to put on her own clothes? She's so young. Why don't I go in and help her?" Huajin said, "She knows how to put on her own clothes. Besides, even if she doesn't know how to, let her figure it out herself. Independence is something that needs to be trained from a young age." Yin Shirshir nodded and asked again, "What's going on with this child?" Gong Jie said, "Didn't Yu mention it to you?" "He mentioned it to me." Yin Shirshir lowered her voice and asked, "She has dual personality disorder too? Really?" "Yeah. I can't tell." Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and laughed. "Does you have dual personality disorder?" "Yes." "You can't tell either, right?" After he said this, Yin Shirshir couldn't help but be enlightened. "But why did you adopt her?" Yin Shirshir paused and said, "My Xiao Jie didn't like children in the past, right?" When Gong Jie heard this, he did not say anything. He only looked at Yu meaningfully. Yin Shirshir followed his gaze and looked at her son. She understood half of what he meant. Could it be that this guy had his first awakening of love so early? Yin Shirshir was a little confused. Hua Jin let out a long sigh. "He's her guardian, so I'm her surrogate guardian." Yin Shirshir was a little confused. What do you mean?" Hua Jin didn't dare to say anything. He just looked at Gong Jie with a helpless and meaningful gaze. Yin Shirshir, on the other hand, was baffled. However, after a short while she understood. Most likely, Gong Jie had entrusted Natalia to Hua Jin. After all, Gong Jie's job required him to fly around the world for many years. It was so dangerous, so it was definitely inconvenient for him to keep Natalia by his side all the time. Therefore, it was only natural that Natalia would be handed over to Hua Jin to raise. However, according to Yu, Gong Jie had specially bought a villa and registered it under Hua Jin's name. He also gave him a blank check as alimony. It had to be said that little Jie was very generous with his money. It seemed that he liked Natalia a lot. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put in so much effort. However, Hua Jin was a little hesitant. What if Natalia and I are not close after Gong Jie leaves? What should I do then? Yin Shirshir said. You have to cultivate your relationship with her. Relationships are cultivated. How do I cultivate? In this aspect, Hua Jin was obviously at a loss. I don't have any experience in this area. It's very simple. For example, Chapter 4099. Natalia had just changed her clothes and was about to leave when she saw Gong Jie, Yin Shirshir, and Hua Jin standing outside the door, along with the four Yu. All of them had charming smiles on their faces. The four of them asked almost simultaneously, "Are we going to the amusement park?" Natalia was stunned for a moment. She was a little confused. What's amusement park? He realized that the woman might not understand what an amusement park was in Chinese, so he explained it in English. It's called amusement park. Amusement park. Natalia immediately realized that the amusement park was the legendary place where there were balloons, amusement rides, and many cartoon characters. For a moment, her eyes were filled with longing. Okay. Her eyes were immediately filled with excitement. When Natalia smiled, she was especially charming. Her violet eyes made him feel as if there was endless tenderness in his heart that could not be contained, and was about to overflow. Gong Jie could not help but walk over. Just as he was about to reach out and hug her, Yin Shirshir stopped him at the right time. Don't forget that today's trip to the amusement park is to let Hua Jin and Natalia cultivate their relationship. When Gong Jie heard that, he could not help but look disappointed. They had indeed discussed it earlier. After all, Hua Jin was Natalia's real guardian. Natalia had to spend most of her time with him. However, now that Natalia liked to stick to Gong Jie and not Hua Jin, Yin Shirshir and Yu thought of using the amusement park's parent-child trip to cultivate their father-daughter relationship. This was also something that had been agreed upon with Hua Jin. Hua Jin had also vowed that he wanted to use the trip to the amusement park to cultivate his relationship with Natalia. Gong Jie had also promised that he would do his best to create an opportunity for the two of them to live together harmoniously. He absolutely could not destroy it. Therefore, he suppressed the urge to hug Natalia and allowed Hua Jin to walk over. He squatted down in front of Natalia and said gently, "Uncle will hug you, okay?" Natalia glanced at Gong Jie with a hint of longing in her eyes. When Gong Jie saw this, he pretended to be indifferent. He walked in front of Yu and gently picked up Yu. Natalia was a little disappointed to see him hug Yu first. Hua Jin tried to reach out his hand again. "Daddy, can you hug me?" Natalia looked at him again and finally nodded in agreement. "Yes. All right." She opened her arms and hugged Hua Jin's shoulders, snuggling into his embrace. Hua Jin carried Natalia in his arms, and the group decided to set off. Their destination was still Fairy Tale Valley, which was built by Lugy Group. However, after 2 years of settling down, and with the completion of the new phase of the project, Fairy Tale Valley had become one of the top theme parks. Other than having more rides, the theme had also been perfected. Fairy Tale Valley was developing a series of themed animated films. They wanted to use Fairy Tale Valley as the backdrop to make a series of fairy tale movies. Fairy Tale Valley's share of the profits for the new quarter was very significant. This also proved that Yu's eye for talent was second to none. Lee Hanlon's methods and ambitions were obvious to everyone. His goal was to turn Fairy Tale Valley into a world-class fairy tale theme park. Chapter 4100. The villa was not too far away from the theme park. When they set off, the traffic was not very congested. Hence, they arrived at Fairy Tale Valley in less than half an hour. With Lee Hanlon's meticulous arrangements, the 5 of them managed to get VIP passes. With this card, it meant that he could play all the games without having to queue up. When they entered the entrance, Natalia was deeply attracted by the themed statue placed at the entrance of Fairy Tale Valley. The themed statue of Fairy Tale Valley was a rainbow unicorn. This was designed by Yu. The unicorn had snow-white manes, black eyes, a golden horn, and a rainbow ponytail. It was so cute and charming that it had become one of the most popular cartoon characters in the world. The rainbow unicorn created by Lugy Holdings had even become the favorite toy of children all over the world. As Lugy Holdings' signature mascot, the sales of this toy accounted for a considerable portion of the company's sales. Many people might not know where this toy came from, but they had definitely seen it before. It was obvious that the design of this toy was a success. What a beautiful unicorn! Natalia ran over with a smile. It was obvious that she loved unicorns. Seeing that his mother really liked the rainbow unicorn, Yu's vanity swelled immeasurably in an instant. She likes the rainbow pony. Yin Shirsher glanced at him coldly. It was as if she saw her son's proud tail. Are you very proud? Gong Jie did not hesitate to pour cold water on him. What's so great about being able to draw? Emph. Unlike some people who only know how to make sarcastic remarks, Gong Jie was speechless. Hua Jin held Natalia's hand and walked to the front of the statue. When he saw that she liked it so much, he could not help but feel happy too. Sometimes he really envied her. The younger the child, the easier it was to be satisfied. Often a lollipop or a toy could be satisfied easily. When you were with your child, you would feel that happiness were actually that simple. Hua Jin's mood could not help but lighten up a little. He lowered his head and held up his phone. Do you want me to take a photo of you? Sure. Natalia pointed at the rainbow pony. I want to take a picture with the rainbow pony. All right. Hua Jin was secretly glad that he was smart enough to bring a selfie stick. He placed his phone on the selfie stick and was about to walk to Natalia's side. Natalia pushed him away in disdain. I want to take a picture with Rainbow Pony alone. Hua Jin, he pouted and said. Can't we take a picture together? I want to take a picture with Rainbow Pony alone. Natalia's attitude was firm, and Hua Jin couldn't say anything more. So he brought her to her spot and raised his phone. Smile. Yes. Natalia was very cooperative, showing her white teeth. Crack. Hua Jin gave her 10 consecutive shots. People with good looks would look good even if it was just a snap of them. As Hua Jin continued to take pictures, he became addicted. He took more than 20 pictures in a row. Natalia's posture as she hugged Rainbow Pony stiffened. Are you done? Seeing that Hua Jin was still taking pictures, Natalia thought that it was because the pictures were not good enough. Chapter 4101. When Hua Jin stood up, Gong Jie immediately snatched the phone from his hand and flipped through the photo album one by one. Swiping his finger across the photos, Natalia's bright smile seemed to make the sun even brighter. Hua Jin was pleased with himself. How's my technique? Gong Jie did not look at him, but continued to admire the photos. He couldn't help but smile and finally spit out 2 words. Not bad. Can you give me a higher rating? When Gong Jie heard Hua Jin's complaint, he looked at him calmly. Why? If I give you a higher rating, you'll get a bonus? Hua Jin was silent. Natalia tilted her head and looked at Hua Jin, then at Gong Jie. She asked softly, Do you want to take a photo with me? Yes. Hua Jin immediately waved at her like a little fangirl. Wait for me. He snatched the phone from Gong Jie and was about to run over when Gong Jie grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back. What are you doing? Stand here. Hua Jin was speechless. Gong Jie glared at him. Stand still. Hua Jin instinctively stood up straight, but he didn't know why he wanted him to stand still. Gong Jie walked to Natalia's side and picked her up. Then he said, take the photos. Hua Jin felt humiliated. So he was treating him like a personal photographer. He had the urge to smash the phone on the ground. Did he really think he had no temper? Gong Jie, this rascal, he would show him what he was made of. Come give me a smile. Hua Jin raised his phone and kept taking photos of Gong Jie and Natalia. Lean your head on your shoulders a little more. Yes, very good. His eagerness made him look like a bumpkin. When Yu saw this, her eyes were filled with disdain. Just a moment ago, he had seen him clenching his fists tightly as though he was about to explode. Who would have thought that he would still be so cowardly? A cowardly flower. When the Gong Jie was done, Hua Jin wanted to walk over and take a selfie with Natalia. However, Yu had already walked over and put her arm around Natalia's shoulder. She smiled and said, take a selfie for us too. As she spoke, she leaned her head against Natalia's head affectionately. Hua Jin said, do you think you're taking a wedding certificate? Yu said, go ahead. Hua Jin. Such an arrogant tone despite his young age. Hua Jin suppressed his indignation and took a few more selfies for Yu and Natalia. When it was finally his turn, Natalia refused to take a selfie. She was attracted by the hot air balloon in the distance. Natalia pointed at the hot air balloon and said, is that a hot air balloon? Gong Jie nodded. Yeah. I want to play. Okay. The group of people were like stars surrounding the moon as they walked away with Natalia. Hua Jin stood alone in the wind and was stunned for a while. He felt so wronged, he came back to his senses and chased after them. He asked and found out that a hot air balloon could only seat 3 people at most. Gong Jie and Yu immediately stuck close to Natalia. It was obvious that the two of them wanted to sit with her. Yin Shishir couldn't take it anymore. She cleared her throat and said, don't forget why you're here. Chapter 4102. Yin Shishir glared at Yu again. Yu was silent. All right. He would give in. Yu stood aside dejectedly. Yin Shishir said to Hua Jin, the 3 of you can sit together. Hua Jin got his wish and boarded the same hot air balloon as Natalia. However, the space in the hot air balloon was very small. With the 3 of them sitting together, the space was already very cramped. Hence, the 3 of them were very close to each other. Hua Jin felt that his face was almost pressed against Gong Jie's back. He looked up with some resentment. Was this guy so tall? Oh, he had forgotten that Gong Jie was almost 1.9 meters tall. However, was the difference of 10 centimeters that big? In the past, when he stood further away, he could not feel it. Now that he was closer, he realized that the difference was so obvious. This height difference made him feel very hurt. It was Natalia's first time in a hot air balloon. Hence, she was a little nervous. She tugged at Hua Jin's clothes tightly. As the hot air balloon slowly rose, she grabbed his collar even more anxiously. How does this hot air balloon fly? Hua Jin was stumped by the question. Children of Natalia's age were especially curious. That one question was enough to make him stumble. It was not that he did not understand, but it would be too difficult to explain. Hua Jin also understood the principle of using hot air to lift the balloon. The upper half of the balloon was a large balloon, and the lower half was a hanging basket. The inside of the balloon heated the air, and used it as buoyancy to lift the entire balloon. However, with such a complicated principle, if he really explained it to her, not only would she not understand, she might even ask worriedly, will this hot air balloon fall? He looked at Gong Jie for help. Natalia saw that Hua Jin was looking at Gong Jie. She also looked at Gong Jie in confusion. However, she saw someone say faintly, by magic. Hua Jin was stunned. How could Natalia believe such a perfunctory answer? Magic. Natalia's eyes lit up. Really? Yep. Oh my god. The world really has magic. It's so interesting. Hua Jin's English was average, but he could barely understand. Gong Jie coaxed her, saying that the hot air balloon could fly because of magic. It was magic that made such a big balloon fly. What surprised him the most was that Natalia actually knew. Believe. Yes. It turns out that children are so easy to coax. But is it really okay to say that? Would it create a misunderstanding for her? While Hua Jin was still hesitating, Natalia turned her head to look at him and asked expectantly, "Do you want to do it? You have a magic." No, sorry. As soon as Hua Jin finished speaking, Natalia's face could not help but show a trace of disappointment. When Gong Jie saw this, he gently held Natalia's little face and winked at her gently. "Natalia, you're a magician. You know. Me. Yep." Gong Jie gently pinched the tip of her nose. "Yes, you are. But," Natalia was a little hesitant and cautiously reminded him, "I don't know magic." "Why not?" Gong Jie gently kissed her forehead. "When you smile, the whole world becomes beautiful. Isn't that the best magic in the world?" As soon as he finished speaking, Natalia understood what he meant. Her eyes widened in surprise, and the boy revealed a charming smile. "Really?" Chapter 4103. When you smile, everyone will be in a good mood. Therefore, your smile is the greatest magic. Hearing that, Natalia smiled at Gong Jie. Then she turned around and smiled at Hua Jin. Hua Jin was stunned for a moment. Very quickly, he was infected by her bright smile and couldn't help but smile too. When Natalia saw that Hua Jin was really smiling, she was instantly inspired. "It's door. It happened. When I laughed you laughed and he laughed too. I really know magic." Gong Jie patted her head in relief. Then he glanced meaningfully at Hua Jin. Hua Jin immediately squatted down and said with a smile, "Natalia's magic is amazing." In fact, he was marveling inwardly. Gong Jie was the one who had not shown his true colors. He didn't know that he was so good at coaxing children. So it could be said that way? Hua Jin felt that his EQ had been crushed. But he had to admit that if magic really existed in this world, Natalia would definitely be the best magician. Because just looking at her smile made him feel like he had been healed. In fact, coaxing a child really doesn't need to be rigid. A child's childhood needs romantic fairy tales. It might as well create a fairy tale world for her. Those ideas and rules that only adults can understand. When she grows up, she will understand. When she is young, shouldn't she enjoy an innocent childhood? The hot air balloon didn't float very far. Because the distance was limited, it floated and floated. When they reached their destination, Hua Jin carried Natalia in his arms and Gong Jie followed closely behind as they got off the hot air balloon. As Yu and Yun Shishir's hot air balloon was still a while away, Gong Jie saw a gazebo not far away and suggested that they wait there for a while. The gazebo was directly opposite the dessert station, which sold milk tea and snacks. Natalia was attracted by the donuts and milk tea. Gong Jie ordered a drink for each of them and bought some snacks. Then they sat at the gazebo and waited. After a while, Yu and Yun Shishir came down. Gong Jie stood up and was about to greet her when he saw Yun Shishir walking over with a pale face. He could not help but feel a little nervous. "What happened?" Yun Shishir patted her chest, obviously still having lingering fears. Yu explained, "Maybe the hot air balloon was too shaky. Mommy thought there was a malfunction, and was afraid that the hot air balloon would fall." Gong Jie said, "How could it fall?" "Accidents are hard to say." Yun Shishir was still in shock. Beside her, Yu mumbled, "You don't trust your son." What do you mean?" When Hua Jin heard this, he could not help but laugh. He reminded her softly, "Your son invested in this amusement park." Yun Shishir suddenly understood. Yu patted his chest and said, "If anything happens to mommy, I'll take responsibility." Gong Jie said coldly, "But if something happens to your mommy and you're with her, who can guarantee that you'll be fine?" Yu was silent for a long time. Then he said in disdain, "Uncle, must you argue with me?" Gong Jie said seriously, "No." "Humph." Yu glanced at him and saw that Natalia was sitting on a chair and eating heartily. Coincidentally, he was also a little hungry, so he walked over and saw that she was hugging a chocolate donut. The corners of her mouth were dirty, and she looked like a greedy kitten. Chapter 4104. Is it good? Yu swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It wasn't that he hadn't eaten donuts before. He didn't like them, but for some reason, when he saw her eating so happily, his appetite was whetted. Hua Jin saw this and said helplessly, "Why do you keep staring at the food in her hands?" "Because she's eating so happily. If you want to eat, I'll buy it for you." Without waiting for Yu to say anything, Hua Jin stood up and walked to the small window. He bought donuts and milk tea for Yu according to the taste he had bought for Natalia. Hua Jin put the donuts into Yu's mouth. Yu took a bite and sighed regretfully. Why, it tasted worse than he had imagined. It wasn't as good as he had imagined. But he saw Natalia eating so happily, especially her cherry lips. She gently took a bite of the donut and broke through the chocolate coating. The soft core was on her lips. It was so tempting. But when he tasted it, it tasted bitter. Yu knew how to make donuts himself. If he were to give a rating for his desserts, he would definitely give it a 9 out of 10. But if he were to give a rating for this dessert station, he would probably give it a 4 out of 10. But when he saw Natalia eating so happily, Yu couldn't help but ask, "Is it good?" Natalia had already finished 2 chocolate donuts and was sucking on her fingers. She looked up and saw Yu looking at her in surprise. She nodded and said, "It's delicious. What's this called?" "Donuts." "Donuts." Natalia tried hard to absorb this new Chinese word. She enunciated clearly, "Donuts, delicious." Gong Jie had already told her that this would be her place of residence in the future. Since she was going to stay here, Chinese would replace English and become her mother tongue. Although she was born here, she lived in an orphanage for a while before she was taken to the United States. Although she didn't forget her Chinese, it had deteriorated a lot. However, Natalia was extremely talented in languages. Even though she hadn't spoken Chinese for a long time, her pronunciation was still very accurate. "Donuts, very delicious." Yu said proudly. "I know how to make donuts too." Natalia looked at him as if she had discovered a new continent. "Do you really know how to make donuts?" "Yes. My cooking is countless times better than this." "Really?" Natalia was stunned. "I don't believe it. If you don't believe me, I can cook it for you. You'll know after you eat it." Yu was very pleased. Beside her, Hua Jin chimed in. "Yu's desserts are indeed delicious. It's true, it's not fake at all." When Natalia heard this, she was very surprised. She looked at Gong Jie inquisitively as if she was asking for his opinion. Gong Jie nodded silently. "That's right. It's true." "Wow." Natalia's eyes sparkled. She immediately hugged Yu's arm and said coquettishly, "I want to eat it. You can cook it for me." "Okay, no problem." Yu winked at her. "I'll make whatever flavor you like. I like strawberries and chocolate." "There are other flavors too." "What other flavors are there?" "For example, mousse, vanilla, coffee." The 2 little clowns started to talk about donuts. Chapter 4105. When it came to food, Yu spoke clearly and logically, and Natalia was also a foodie. Her appetite was whetted by Yu. In a way, these 2 little fellows were really a match made in heaven. One loved to eat and the other knew how to eat. Hua Jin walked over, not wanting to interrupt them. However, they were at the amusement park, and they couldn't just sit there and talk about, what flavor of donuts? "Natalia, be a good girl. When Yu comes home, I'll make donuts for you. Let's go on the Ferris wheel now, okay?" Natalia looked at Hua Jin, and then looked at Yu reluctantly. She wanted to say something, but she didn't. It was obvious that she was a little disappointed. When Yu saw this, he couldn't bear to see her like this, but he still promised. "I promise you, I'll make you delicious donuts." "When will it be?" "I'm not free tomorrow." "How about the day after tomorrow?" "Okay." Natalia nodded obediently, and then she was willing to stand up. Hua Jin held Natalia's hand, and Natalia took the initiative to reach out and hold Gong Jie's hand. From afar, the backs of the 3 of them looked inexplicably harmonious and warm. This time, Hua Jin came to the amusement park fully prepared. He was in disguise, but along the way, he still attracted the attention of many tourists. "Ah, isn't that Hua Jin?" "It feels like it, but why would Hua Jin appear here?" "That makes sense. But from his silhouette and aura. Also look at his hat. I remember when Hua Jin appeared at the airport, he was wearing that hat." How is that possible? Did you see it with your own eyes? Of course. At that time, I personally went to the airport to pick him up. I'm Hua Jin's loyal fan. As the number of people increased, the discussions became louder and louder. Many tourists wanted to see what was going on, so they kept squeezing towards Hua Jin and looking in his direction. At this time, many people found something even more interesting. That man who looks like Hua Jin is holding a little girl's hand. This little girl is so pretty. She looks like a mixed blood. How is he similar? He's definitely a mixed blood. Oh my God. Look, she has purple eyes. Impossible. How could there be purple eyes in this world? Could it be cosmetic contact lenses? Isn't it a little too exaggerated for this young girl to wear cosmetic contact lenses? Look at that man, he's the one the little girl is holding. God, he's so handsome. He's even more handsome than Hua Jin. The point is that it's so high. I feel like he's over 9 meters tall. You look so aggressive. TSK. I'm suddenly so envious of the little girl they're holding hands with. Don't tell me both of them are gay. Most good-looking men are gay. Gradually, the discussions became louder and louder. Gong Jia also heard the discussions and glanced sideways. He saw more and more people approaching their direction. Hua Jin became more and more nervous. It would be fine if there was a distance, but in close proximity, no disguise could hide the fact that he was the superstar Hua Jin. What should he do? If they were discovered, this place would definitely turn into a pot of porridge. Why not run away? This idea suddenly flashed through Hua Jin's mind. Chapter 4106. Get lost. There was an angry shout. Gong Jia's sharp gaze swept over with displeasure. The people around him were shocked by his gaze. Gong Jia had a pair of eyebrows that were as sharp as the edge of a sword. Usually, he was expressionless and appeared relatively calm. However, when he frowned, he exuded an aura of authority without being angry. He had the inexplicable aura of an emperor. Coupled with that pair of cold eyes, it was enough to freeze the crowd within a few dozen meters into ice on this sunny day. In an instant, the noisy crowd quietened down. Everyone was intimidated by Gong Jia's cold gaze. Super fierce. This man was super fierce. He looked cool and handsome, but when he lost his temper, there was a thunderous feeling. Wherever Gong Jia's gaze landed, the crowd retreated by 3 meters. Hua Jin was also stunned. It was not that he was intimidated by Gong Jia's aura, but he did not expect Gong Jia's gaze to be so powerful. It was much more powerful than 10 bodyguards. However, he finally found a resonance. If not for the restriction of his identity, he would have asked those people, right? He's really fierce, right? His eyes seemed to be able to shoot out sharp swords. Right? It was not that he was a coward. It was true. However, at this time, he was thankful that Gong Jia's gaze was too intimidating. Otherwise, he did not know how to get out of this predicament. Yu and Yun Shirshir, who were behind him, benefited from this. With Gong Jia, the god of death, clearing the way in front, the road behind naturally became smoother. Yun Shirshir did not have to worry about being recognized by passers-by. The 5 of them entered the Ferris wheel without any problems. It was Natalia's first time seeing the Ferris wheel. Her eyes were filled with longing and some worry. To her, the Ferris wheel and the hot air balloon were probably more exciting activities. The hot air balloon was fine. This Ferris wheel was really high. It was so high that even if she raised her head, she could not see the top. Her childhood was spent either in the welfare home or in the hospital. If it weren't for the looks of discrimination from the other children in the orphanage, or the smell of disinfectant, he wouldn't have been able to resist. Although her purple eyes were very beautiful, the other children in the orphanage all treated her as an anomaly. They all called her monster or monster. The children were still young and immature. Most of the children felt that only those with black or brown eyes were considered normal. Her purple eyes made her look like a fairy. The children were all afraid of the fairy, so they didn't want to play with her. As a result, Natalia's childhood was very lonely. It was her first time going to an amusement park, let alone a Ferris wheel. Therefore, uneasiness, excitement, nervousness, agitation, all kinds of complicated feelings mixed together. Yu could see the worry on her face and explained, "Don't worry, the Ferris wheel is very safe." So tall. Natalia craned her neck and stared for a long time. Huajin asked gently, "Do you want to play?" Natalia nodded. "Yeah, I want to play. Then let's go together." Natalia nodded contentedly. The car could seat a total of 4 people, so Yin Shirshir suggested waiting for them at the rest area. She didn't really like the Ferris wheel. She had only come to the amusement park to accompany Natalia. Chapter 4107. It was Natalia's first time on the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel made 2 rounds. When the car reached the highest point of the first round, Natalia could not help but feel nervous. Yu was also nervous. He could not help but recall the time when they were on the Ferris wheel. They had been attacked by assassins and the Ferris wheel had been stopped at a high point. He and Xiao Yichen had been on the brink of death. Therefore, it had left an indelible shadow on the Ferris wheel. However, perhaps because of Gong Jie's presence, Yu felt a little more at ease. For some reason, even though he usually despised Gong Jie, it was only in words. In reality, as long as Gong Jie was around, Yu would feel a great sense of security. The name Gong Jie represented a sense of security. Therefore, when Yu wanted to find an adoptive father for Natalia, the first person he thought of was Gong Jie. This was also the reason why he had considered this. Although it was dangerous, it was also the greatest security. Yin Shirshir's idea was really good. After returning from the amusement park, Natalia and Huajin's relationship had improved a lot. In addition, before Huajin became famous, he had also done a few shows related to children. On Where Are We Going, Daddy? As a substitute father, he had also spent a few episodes with a non-celebrity child. He had some experience in dealing with children, and could make Natalia happy. Huajin and Natalia's relationship had improved a lot. Logically speaking, Gong Jie should be able to leave in peace. However, Gong Jie was a little reluctant. Therefore, the date of his departure was postponed again and again. Huajin repeatedly reminded him and beat around the bush, telling him to focus on his work, and that he would take good care of Natalia. In order to take care of Natalia, Huajin turned down all the shows that he could. Anyway, Gong Jie had given him a considerable amount of alimony. He did not mind taking a break, and taking care of Natalia wholeheartedly. He had even thought about it. After some time, when Natalia and he were closer, he would take her on a trip around the world. Don't be too optimistic. In the end, Gong Jie was reluctant to leave. However, even if he was reluctant to leave, there was nothing he could do. After all, the Hurricane Group's affairs could not be handled without him. Gong Jie had no choice but to leave after being urged again and again by the other party. Before he left, Gong Jie wanted to throw a family reunion for Natalia. What a coincidence. Natalia had been craving Yu's desserts for a long time, so Gong Jie greeted Yu and asked him to make desserts for Natalia. Naturally, the boy agreed to it at once. He even patted his chest and promised that he would make a dessert table for Natalia. Therefore, he set the alarm and decided to get up early the next morning to start work. However, something unexpected happened in the morning. The next morning he woke up. However, the person who woke up was not Yu. Gong Fan opened his eyes. He felt as if a century had passed since the last time he fell asleep. He was woken up by Yu's alarm. He was still sleepy. However, Yin Shirshir also heard the alarm and walked in to wake him up. However, she also realized that the person who woke up was not Yu but Gong Fan. Yin Shirshir's head thudded and she was stunned. Her first reaction was, "Oh my god, it was Gong Fan. He was awake." Her second reaction was, "Did Gong Fan know how to make a dessert table?" The answer was obvious. No. Chapter 4108. Gong Fan did not notice Yin Shirshir's strange gaze. "Good morning, Mommy." "Good morning, you're up so early?" Yin Shirshir smiled. Gong Fan was also a little surprised. "I was woken up by the alarm. Why did I wake up so early?" I'll go prepare breakfast for you. Get ready to get up and wash your face and brush your teeth." Yin Shirshir hurriedly left, wondering if she should report to Gong Jie. Gong Fan saw that Yin Shirshir left in a hurry and found it strange. He instinctively went to the bedside cabinet to search for something. After searching for a while, he suddenly found a notebook. He picked it up and flipped through a few pages. Yu had the habit of keeping a diary, and so did Gong Fan. Rather than calling it a diary, It was more like a way for Yu and Gongfan to communicate. Yu understood what happened to Gongfan that day through his diary. Gongfan also understood what happened to Yu over the past few days, through Yu's diary. This time, Gongfan slept for a long time. He did not know why, but when he woke up again, it was actually half a month later. He actually slept for half a month. 15 days. In the past, he had never slept for such a long time. Before he could figure out the reason, Gongfan suddenly flipped to the latest page of the diary. I must wake up early tomorrow to make a dessert table for Natalia. She has been thinking about it for a long time. I've decided to make her a Hello Kitty-themed dessert table. At night, I'll prepare the tools and wait for work to start the next day. But I'm a little worried. What if Gongfan wakes up? He doesn't know anything about baking. Gongfan was silent. Hello Kitty. Dessert table? What was that? Dessert? And who was Natalia? This name had already been mentioned in several pages. Looking at the name, it seemed to be a girl, but who was it? Gongfan put the notebook aside and sorted out his emotions. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, he walked into the living room. Xiao Yichen had already finished his breakfast and was looking at him expectantly. Yu, why are you taking so long? Hurry up and finish your breakfast. We have to set off. Gongfan narrowed his eyes. Yu. When Xiao Yichen heard her tone, he shuddered and hurriedly corrected himself. Fan. Don't call me Fan. Gongfan didn't like such a greeting. Xiao Yichen hurriedly explained. But that sounds so intimate. Gongfan immediately expressed his refusal. No. Xiao Yichen was speechless. What a tsundere Fan. Yin Shirshir brought out the bread and milk. Gongfan sat at the dining table and asked curiously, Mommy, who is Natalia? She said vaguely. Yu seems to like her. He promised her that he would make her a beautiful dessert table today. Do you know how to make it? Gongfan shook his head. How could he know how to cook? He didn't know anything. Not to mention baking. Then, Yin Shirshir was in a dilemma. What should we do then? Yu had prepared everything and wanted to perform well today. Gongfan pursed his lips. He was in a dilemma, but he didn't want to disappoint Yu. Is the dessert table very difficult? Xiao Yichen and Yin Shirshir looked at each other and nodded hesitantly. A little. Gongfan was silent again. Chapter 4109. However, they had already made a promise. No matter what, if another personality suddenly appeared, he had to complete the task at hand on behalf of the other personality. In the past, it seemed that Yu had been cleaning up his messes. That was fine. Now he couldn't possibly back out. Along the way, Gongfan held onto his cell phone. He wasn't playing with it. Instead, he was studying it seriously. He looked up tutorials and techniques on baking on the internet, and made use of the limited time he had to study hard. Yin Shirshir was quite confident in Gongfan. Baking was actually not difficult. As long as he was careful, serious, and slightly particular about the food, he would be able to complete it very well. However, it was obvious that she had made a mistake in her estimation in some aspects. Gongfan was very particular about everything except food. As the food party, he was very particular about it, but he didn't pay attention to how to complete a dish. When they arrived at Natalia's house, the car stopped. Gongfan still looked confused. He couldn't figure it out. He didn't even know what butter was and what cheese was. What was a mold and what was saccharin? Should he give up? He really couldn't figure out what these formulas were made of. If he was given dozens of mathematical Olympiad questions, it would still be relatively easy. Wasn't it difficult for him to bake? However, Gongfan could only imagine Yu's disappointed expression in the diary. It seems that I should let you sleep for a longer time. Gongfan suddenly remembered that he seemed to have been in a deep sleep during this period. Could it be that, was it someone who had been pressing on him, and not letting him wake up? Could it be that, Yu despised him for being a scammer? Didn't want him to show his face? If this baking wasn't done well, Yu might be very angry. Gongfan held his forehead helplessly. It didn't matter who was angry, but he couldn't be angry at this little ancestor. Hence, when he walked to the kitchen, Gongfan could only bite the bullet and put on the cartoon-style apron that Huajin had bought. He stood in the baking area with a gloomy expression. Oven, mold, cream. All the tools were available. These were all prepared by Yu. It was all for this day to give Natalia a surprise. All right. Surprise, surprise. There was surprise but no joy. Gong Fan told himself. Don't worry about the adjustment of the formula or the heat. Just roll up your sleeves and do it based on your feelings. He did not believe that even though they were two personalities, Yu could cook so well while he could not. Come at me directly. Gong Fan simply followed his intuition and started to do it. The dessert rack is hello. Kitty was pink in color, so Yu's original idea was to have strawberry-flavored desserts. The dessert counter consisted of multi-layer cakes, cupcakes, shaped biscuits, mousse, pudding, and other small desserts. He tried the donut first. According to the recipe and tutorial, Gong Fan carefully added the softened butter with fine sugar and salt. Wait a minute. Salt. He was stunned for a moment and read the tutorial 3 times to make sure that he was not mistaken. He still felt strange. Aren't donuts supposed to be sweet? Why add salt? Forget it. Gong Fan closed his eyes and began to beat it evenly with the egg beater. His ideal was to make it slightly puffy. In the end, it was directly turned into liquid by him. Liquid failure. Chapter 41:10. He originally thought that everything was difficult at the beginning, but he didn't expect that the next step would definitely be much more difficult than the beginning. Next, the tutorial said to add milk powder. Milk powder. What was milk powder? Gong Fan looked at the circle of packaging bags on the dining table. Most of them were imported ingredients. If it was in English, he could still understand it, but some were in Italian and some were in French. Moreover, even if it was in English, he didn't know what this thing was. Hence, he decided to taste it himself. It was milk powder. It should be easy to identify. He reached his finger into a packaging table and gently tasted it. Oh? What was this? It was astringent, and the powder was a little smooth. There was also an inexplicable bitter taste. It shouldn't be milk powder. Milk powder should be sweet. He tasted another generation flour. Gong Fan tried many kinds of powdery things and finally found milk powder. Suddenly, he felt a sense of relief. I finally found you. Fortunately, I didn't give up. He was filled with emotions in his heart, so he wanted to gently shake the milk powder into the mixing bowl. Rustle. Gong Fan was silent. Looking at about half a bowl of milk powder, he was a little confused. It seemed that there was a little too much milk powder. However, the formula didn't seem to say how much milk powder to add. This amount should be just right? If there was too much milk powder, then the subsequent ingredients should be slightly more. There shouldn't be a problem. Moreover, he liked milk powder. Gong Fan made up his mind, so he braced himself and continued to do it. He cracked 4 eggs and accidentally broke the eggshell shards into the egg. The shards were mixed into the thick egg liquid, and couldn't be picked out no matter how hard he tried. He simply used chopsticks and finally picked out the fragments. He added dry yeast, flour, and butter one after another. He directly kneaded the dough into a ball, and threw it into the toaster with a thud. Yin Shirshir, who was passing by the kitchen, heard this strange sound and was a little worried, so she sneaked into the kitchen. Gong Fan was rummaging through the cupboards in search of strawberry-flavored chocolate sauce, so he didn't notice Yin Shirshir sneaking in. The dough was a little big, and the toaster was buzzing. Soon after 10 minutes, Gong Fan opened the toaster and took out the hot dough with gloves. At that time, the dough had already fermented and was bigger than before. However, why does it feel so hard? It clearly said that the dough would be softer than before when it was taken out of the toaster. Forget it. Gong Fan used his hand to press out the gas inside. In the end, he accidentally cracked the dough. Should I add more water? That wouldn't do. This step wasn't mentioned in the tutorial. He hadn't reached the final step yet. Perhaps this was a normal phenomenon. Yes, its existence was reasonable. Gong Fan left the fermented dough to dry for 10 minutes before he started to fiddle with the strawberry chocolate sauce. The strawberry chocolate sauce was ready-made, so all he had to do was mix it according to the right ratio. Chapter 41:11. Why did it feel like something that Yu did with such ease had become a stumbling block when it came to him? Baking was so difficult. Gong Fan felt that his head was about to become twice as big. He braced himself and started to roll the dough. In the end, he was so busy that he finally used the mold to cut the donuts into circles. He spread the strawberry jam evenly on the donuts and walked to the pan of oil. Yin Shirshir did not want to disturb his great undertaking at first, but when she saw that he was about to put the donuts with strawberry jam into the pan, she wanted to stop him. Splash! Crackle! Oil splattered everywhere. Gong Fan calmly held the pan in his hand and expressionlessly blocked the oil that was about to splash on his face. His expression was ice cold. After about 10 seconds, he turned off the fire and approached the pan of oil. Only then did he realize that there was something charred on the surface of the oil. He did not know that applying the strawberry jam was a step that could only be done after the oil was out of the pan. If he put the strawberry jam into the pan of oil, it would be charred. He looked at the 2 black balls of donuts, and the veins on his forehead throbbed. Gong Fan carefully scooped up the 2 balls of donuts. Looking at the 2 balls of donuts, he could not help but feel a little worried. What was this? He had been busy for a long time, and these 2 donuts were actually charred. Gong Fan's eyelids twitched violently. The resentment in his heart towards the donuts gradually rose. No. He could not accept such a passable product. He had to start over. It was still early anyway. Gong Fan had lost count of how many donut-making trips. Yin Shirshir watched from behind. Looking at Gong Fan's calm but flustered appearance, she could not help but want to laugh. He was calm because no matter how troublesome it was, he was still expressionless. He was flustered because he could always make the simple steps in use hands very complicated. Crackle. The donuts were put into the pan of oil for the 3rd time. Behind him, Xiao Yichen also tiptoed into the kitchen and quietly stood behind him, watching with Yin Shirshir. When the donuts were ready, they finally had the shape that a donut should have. Of course, as for the taste, that was another matter. The desserts from Gong Fan's hands would definitely not taste good. For some reason, this was Yin Shirshir's intuition. Gong Fan did not notice that Huajin had also walked in behind him. The 3 of them stared at him with their mouths agape as he made desserts. Tragic. How tragic. It was extremely tragic. Could it be any more tragic? Huajin looked at the trash can. There were several black pancakes and his heart ached. At the same time, there was some drumming. She wondered how palatable the donut that Gong Fan had made would be. Could it be food poisoning? Why don't I let little Yichen test the poison first and see if it's edible? I don't want Natalia to get food poisoning after eating his donut. I have a feeling that Fan Fan isn't making donuts, whispered little Yichen as he inched closer to his mother's ear. Yin Shirshir heard this and held back her laughter. She asked in return, "If it's not donuts, then what is it?" Xiao Yichen frowned seriously. "It's poison." Yin Shirshir was speechless. "Mommy, can I not eat it?" Xiao Yichen trembled. "I'm scared." Chapter 41:12. Fan Fan, is this a donut? Huajin asked curiously. When Gong Fan heard the voice, he turned around abruptly and saw 4 people standing behind him, looking at his creation. He grunted and said, "Donuts." Huajin, on the other hand, was wondering if this thing could be eaten. Would it look a little scary? Perhaps it would be able to cope with it after eating it. Hence he instructed Xiao Yichen, "Go and try it. What do you think of the taste?" Xiao Yichen was shocked. He didn't expect Huajin to push him into the fire pit. Why didn't he try it himself? He was obviously asking him to test the poison. Xiao Yichen pouted, obviously unhappy. He asked in return, "Why don't you try it?" Xiao Fan's desserts must be delicious. As Huajin spoke, he glanced at him from the corner of his eye. "Why? Do you think Fan Fan's desserts taste bad?" Gong Fan couldn't be bothered with how Huajin addressed him. Instead, he glared at Xiao Yichen and snorted. "Why? Do you think it tastes bad?" Xiao Yichen gulped and shook his head vigorously. "No. I believe in my brother's cooking." "Then try it." "Try." Xiao Yichen was so shocked that he couldn't speak. What the hell? Had he really become a test subject for poison? He felt terrible. He wanted to cry. Why was his life so hard? He was always pushed out to do such things at critical moments. However, Xiao Yichen didn't want to offend his brother. He immediately took a step forward righteously, and looked like he was ready to die. "Okay, I'll try it." Gong Fan was unhappy when he saw his brother's expression. He looked like he was about to jump into the fire pit. "You don't seem willing." Why would I? Xiao Yichen looked at him reproachfully. I think it should taste good. Then don't look like that. Xiao Yichen was speechless. He let out an "oh," and had no choice but to accept his fate and pick up a donut. Looking at the burnt surface, he hardened his heart, gritted his teeth and took a bite. A comet colliding with Earth, volcano eruption. Various apocalyptic scenes flashed before his eyes. Xiao Yichen felt as if his entire body was being scorched by lava, and tears almost flowed out of his eyes. What was that? Is this a donut? There was no sweetness at all. It was like eating a piece of charred coal. Not only was the color similar, but the taste was also exactly the same. It tasted so bad that he wanted to cry. Even taking a punch wasn't as painful as this. However, even someone like Xiao Yichen, who had a strong tolerance, did not frown. He only snorted and said calmly, "Not bad." Gong Fan's eyes lit up. Really? Yes, it's true, but I don't think it's the kind of smell Natalia likes. Is it too sweet? Gong Fan muttered again. I did put a little too much milk powder and saccharin. Xiao Yichen muttered to himself. It would be better if it was unreasonably sweet. At least there was sweetness. What was this smell? This was the smell of charcoal. It was bitter and astringent. Why were the two personalities, Gong Fan and Yu Yu, so different when they were clearly the same person? Xiao Yichen couldn't help but miss Yu Yu. You don't look well. Gong Fan sized him up and became suspicious. Chapter 41:13. When Yin Shirshir heard this, she inexplicably despised her son. Xiao Yichen, you're really good at lying through your teeth. It's fine if it doesn't taste good, but you even put on an act. However, Yin Shirshir was touched. Xiao Yichen must have been afraid that Gong Fan would be disappointed and upset, so he endured the taste and pretended that it tasted good. It's delicious. Xiao Yichen gave Gong Fan an exaggerated thumbs up. When Gong Fan heard this, he was inexplicably touched. It turned out that the donuts he made were this delicious? Even Xiao Yichen was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat the donuts he made in the future. Gong Fan pursed his lips and revealed a rare gentle smile. It's okay. In the future, if you want to eat it, I'll make it for you, okay? When Xiao Yichen heard this, he was so shocked that he almost couldn't close his mouth. He clicked his tongue and looked helplessly at Yin Shirshir. At that moment, Yin Shirshir could only look helplessly at the sky and pretend that she wasn't there. Hua Jin tried his best to cover his mouth and snigger. This was too funny. What kind of mother would trick her own son? However, this Gong Fan was so smart that he couldn't tell that Xiao Yichen was just being perfunctory. How was it delicious? Just by looking at its appearance, one could tell that it tasted terrible. Moreover, looking at Xiao Yichen's pained and embarrassed expression, it was enough to prove that this thing tasted terrible. Hua Jin shuddered in his heart. He was deeply in awe of Gong Fan's culinary skills. Gong Jie glanced at Xiao Yichen, and then at Hua Jin and winked. Hua Jin carefully leaned over and discussed with him. Why don't we explain the situation to Natalia and forget about the dessert table? If we really let Natalia eat this, she'll definitely be poisoned. It was rare that Gong Jie agreed with her. Yes. With that, he raised his head and said to Gong Fan, Xiao Fan, you don't have to make desserts. When Gong Fan heard this, he was puzzled. Why? Because Gong Jie frowned and made up a lie. Natalia has a cold. She shouldn't eat anything too sweet. How about this? When Gong Fan heard this, he raised his eyebrows and complained. I've worked so hard for so long and finally made the donuts. You're telling me that she has a cold and doesn't want to eat them. Couldn't you have told me earlier? Gong Jie. The desserts you make have to be F***king edible. Is this food edible? Even puppies don't eat it? Hua Jin looked at Gong Fan, but he couldn't bear it. Especially when he saw the disappointment in his eyes, he felt an inexplicable sense of helplessness. Gong Fan had worked so hard to make it, he couldn't possibly let it go to waste. Forget it, he couldn't let his painstaking efforts go to waste. Hua Jin thought that he had sacrificed his life for the sake of righteousness, and should eat a piece of the donut he made. He didn't want the little guy to work so hard for nothing and feel disappointed. Although he knew that this donut would definitely taste terrible, he knew in his heart that it would definitely taste like wax when he saw Xiao Yichen's expression. However, he had to warm the little guy's heart. Hence, Hua Jin clenched his fists and made an important decision. When Xiao Yichen saw Hua Jin walking over, he was shocked. He desperately winked at Hua Jin, telling him not to touch Hua Jin's dark cuisine. However, Hua Jin didn't see it until Hua Jin stuffed a piece of donut into his mouth. Boom! Hua Jin was shocked. Chapter 41:14. What was this taste? This feeling? It was as if his brain had been blown up by an atomic bomb. It was crispy on the inside and tender on the outside. It's so hard. Hua Jin had just uttered these two words when Gong Fan narrowed his eyes in alarm. Does it taste bad? No. Hua Jin used a Herculean effort to swallow that lump of black stuff. His entire mouth was filled with an inexplicable sandy texture and bitterness. It felt as if he had swallowed a mouthful of black soil. To be able to make a donut taste like this was also a skill. Hua Jin quickly corrected himself. It's so delicious that it's hard to describe. Gong Fan was stunned. At the side, Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen glanced at him in disdain. Was this PUBG? He could actually make such a big turn. Gong Fan was very smart. Even if he was initially fooled by Xiao Yichen's superb acting skills, he would still be able to tell that the donut tasted really bad. Hua Jin's words could lie, but his eyes and micro-expressions couldn't. In other words, no matter how good his acting skills were, he couldn't hide the fact that the donut tasted bad. Was it really that bad? He muttered in his heart and glanced at the black donut on the plate. He didn't believe it, so he took a piece and took a bite. Dong! He almost fell to the ground. Yin Shirshir was frightened and hurried over to support him. Gong Fan struggled to support himself on the table and waved his hand gently to indicate that he was fine. However, when he turned around, Yin Shirshir saw that his face was gloomy and full of disappointment. It tastes so bad. He had never eaten anything so disgusting. Although he didn't want to admit it, the donut tasted really bad. He emptied the entire plate of failed products into the bin expressionlessly. Everyone was silent. They didn't know whether to laugh or console him. Gong Fan sounded a little lonely. Is Yu's food delicious? Yin Shirshir said helplessly. He's better at cooking. Oh. With a thud, Gong Fan's head drooped as low as it could go. It was obvious that he was utterly disappointed. He had a competitive personality and was unwilling to do anything worse than others. However, in this aspect he really couldn't compare to Yu, so he felt a little sad. At the same time, he was somewhat unwilling. Yu was so outstanding that he dared not look her in the eye. He had made this donut very seriously and had even failed several times. But why did he still fail this time? Gong Fan felt inexplicably frustrated. Yin Shirshir rubbed his head helplessly and said, "Alright, don't be sad. Actually, it's not bad that you managed to do it for the first time. It was Mommy's first time cooking, and it didn't taste as good as yours. You're like Mommy in this aspect. Mommy doesn't seem to have any talent in this area." When Gong Fan heard this, the sadness in his heart eased a little. Really? Yes, really. So you see, when has Mommy ever cooked before? It's always Yu who cooks. Mommy doesn't know how to cook or make desserts. When Gong Fan heard this, he felt upset. I'll study it more next time. Who knows, I might have a talent for making desserts too. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he didn't know why, but he quivered. Chapter 41:15. Xiao Yichen quickly comforted him. Actually, you don't have to. Look, if you're not good at cooking, you don't have to try it. Gong Fan was a little suspicious when he heard this. Why? Do you think I don't have talent in this area? Yes. However, Xiao Yichen did not dare to say it out loud. He only said vaguely, I think you're better than Yu in many aspects. For example, didn't you come up with the Devai project? I heard from my uncle that although the idea of the Devai project is shocking, if it succeeds, Hurricane will control the global market. When Gong Fan heard this, he did not know why, but there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. The so-called Devai project is actually built on Yu's blueprints. Without his blueprints, even if I came up with this project, it would be a pipe dream. Xiao Yichen was speechless. But you're very good at business. But Yu's business philosophy is not worse than mine. Xiao Yichen was even more speechless. Gong Fan pursed his lips and said calmly, All of you get out. I'll try again. Even if I don't make it into a dessert table, I'll make it into a donut. He did not want to disappoint Yu. He did not want him to think that he was useless. No matter what, he still wanted to give it a try. When Huajin and Gongjia heard this, they looked at each other. Yin Shishir smiled faintly and said, "If he wants to make it himself, why don't we let him try again? No matter what this child does, he always wants to finish what he started." Although she knew that cooking was also a matter of talent, she did not know how to cook, and Muyaja was not very good at it either. However, Yu was a natural at cooking. She could only say that he was very talented in cooking and had a keen sense of smell when it came to food. This was something that they could not achieve. Whether it was genetic mutation or Yu's unique talent, cooking depended on one's intuition. Some people, even if they had never learned how to cook, could make anything taste good. Yu could even create many dishes that could not be found in restaurants all over the world. The four of them left the kitchen quietly. Gong Fan looked at the kitchen counter silently. In the end, he took a deep breath, rolled up his sleeves, and started from scratch. At the door, Natalia secretly pushed the door open and peeked through the gap. She saw a slender figure standing in front of the kitchen counter. She looked around and saw that he was the only one in the huge kitchen, so she tiptoed in. She quietly stood behind Gong Fan and quietly watched him stir the egg. Gong Fan was so focused on what he was doing that he did not realize that there was someone standing behind him. Natalia's footsteps were very light. No matter how sharp Gong Fan was, he did not notice her appearance for a moment. Until Natalia looked at the dessert that he hadn't finished making and asked curiously, "Did the dessert table fail today?" Gong Fan was shocked. He did not realize that there was someone beside him. He turned his head abruptly and saw that it was Natalia. He was a little surprised. You are?" Natalia opened her eyes and blinked slightly. There was some confusion in her gaze. "You forgot about me?" Gong Fan frowned and pondered for a moment. He quickly guessed her identity. Natalia. Chapter 41:16. Gong Fan took a deep look at Natalia. He was deeply attracted by her purple eyes. He had never seen purple eyes before. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Gong Fan couldn't help but fall into a daze and couldn't react for a moment. Natalia was also stunned. She immediately recognized that although the child in front of her had Yu's body, he wasn't Yu. She seemed to have heard that Yu had dual personality. Natalia carefully observed Gong Fan's somewhat unfamiliar expression and pouted slightly. "You're him, right?" Gong Fan was stunned and didn't understand what she meant. Natalia reminded him. "What's your name?" "Gong." "Gong Fan?" Gong Fan was shocked. "How do you know my name?" Natalia revealed a smug expression. "I heard Auntie Alice mention you before. One is Gong Fan, the other is Yu." Gong Fan saw that there was nowhere to hide his identity, so he said calmly, "Yes, it's me." "I see." Natalia turned around with her back facing him. She closed her eyes and decided to tell him her secret. "Actually, I'm the same as you." Gong Fan was stunned for a moment and quickly understood what she meant. "You're also?" "Yes. I have an older sister who looks exactly like me. Her name is Natalia Lisa. However, I've always been very afraid of her." "Why?" "She's very bad." Natalia furrowed her brows, her expression solemn. "She will hurt me and others. So I'm very afraid of her. However, it's as if she lives in my body. I can't chase her away no matter how hard I try." When Gong Fan heard this, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he hesitated. He actually wanted to ask, between Natalia and Natalia, who was the main personality and who was the second personality. However, he opened his mouth and hesitated. In the end, he didn't say anything. "Sometimes I'll see her in my dreams. She'll stand there and smile coldly at me. I'll feel afraid, but I can't move. At this time, I'll wake up covered in cold sweat." Gong Fan listened seriously. He was the only one who could fit into her world, because he understood the world of dual personalities. Natalia turned around with her hands behind her back. She was wearing a dress and looked as cute as a doll. "However, sometimes I would fall asleep. Once I fall asleep, it would always be for a very long time. My consciousness is clearly very happy, but my eyes are closed. No matter how hard I try, I can't open my eyes. Gong Fan also had such a resonance. I do that sometimes too. I'll sleep for a long time. No matter how hard I try to open my eyes, all I see is darkness. Natalia's voice suddenly turned cold. It feels like I'm dead. Gong Fan's body stiffened. Indeed, this feeling was no different from being a walking corpse. Do you know? Natalia asked him. I've had electroshock therapy before. Electroshock treatment. Gong Fan realized that the electroshock treatment she was talking about was the insane treatment plan that Yun Shirshir had mentioned before. It used electric shocks to inflict pain on people. I know that Romanka wants to chase Natalia Lisa out of my body, but Natalia always hides in my body. I can only bear the pain.